Hello and welcome once again to the Inner Sanctum. My name's James.
And my name is Adie, and tonight we are going to start off with marking the passing of a wonderful researcher who passed away recently, Miss Rosemary Ellen Guiley. We couldn't do an Inner Sanctum without mentioning this great person.
There was a saying told to me years and years ago that when somebody passes away that you lose an entire library of information and knowledge, and it's always really sad when you hear about the loss of somebody, because you know that although their research may continue by other individuals, that perhaps some of the magic that they put into that work themselves is now sadly lost to the world, and it makes you wonder whether or not some of the great leaps in the research may take longer to be made now that those people are no longer here. We've got a few other things in the news to talk about. We've got two more things really that are kind of hitting the headlines really. One of the things will be Area 51. Adie's got some details on that's been hitting the news on social media fairly recently. And also something that caught my eye was the Manson murder house being sold to none other than Ghost Adventures star Zach Bagans, which is really, really interesting. I don't think it comes as any shock as well that I learned that he was going to be doing some form of Ghost Adventures special on
spin-off, wasn't it?
Yeah, spin-off on sort of serial killer history as well, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So that doesn't really come as any great surprise now that he's bought this property, or at least alleged to have bought this property, although it is reported as an exclusive that he has done that. What do we think about that? I mean, is it just going too far, or is it the height of research?
I'm not sure. I'll be honest with you, if anyone is obviously people listen to this program, you all know our thoughts on Mr. Bagans. I honestly thought it was just another way for him to do another documentary and using the Manson name. If I was honest, when I first read it, I'd be very surprised if there's not a documentary coming with that house.
Yeah, that must be, mustn't there?
I would have thought so. The next version after the Demon House will be the Manson murder house.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't really have much to say on it, if I'm honest. I'm openly honest about it. I just read it and did my usual roll of the eyes, and there's nothing to say that there's anything paranormal connected with the place just because these things happened. It just depends how it's presented, I think.
Went cheap. The property went cheap.
Yeah, apparently you can do quite well if you're in the para-celeb world with that kind of money.
Surprising, really. I mean, according to TMZ.com, apparently, according to them, Zach jumped at the chance when he heard the home was up for sale for $1.98 million.
Bloody hell.
Which is really low. I mean, here in the UK, a property for £1.98 million will not look like the sort of mansion house that this place looks like, although maybe not with the gruesome history, which could be the reason.
I'm guessing it's down to the gruesome history. Who the hell wants to live in that place with all the things that happen?
It's got its own pool. It looks like some sort of Spanish style villa.
I'm interested to see if he's moving in instead of actually just investigating it. Is he planning to live there? Because of his museum, is he going to set up a second museum in the Manson house?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he says that everything inside's original, or almost everything's original. One of the main things that attracted him was that it's got 1,600 square feet. It's got 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, also views over the city. He says he won't say what his plans are to do with the house. He says it's got a storied history beyond just the Manson murders. He also says that dogs have mysteriously disappeared and occupants have been freaked out over what he says is paranormal activity. So he's been really cagey about what he's going to do. Now that to me would indicate that he's going to be using that for his next documentary.
I think so.
A la, like you say, Demon House.
I would say this is definitely going to be his next documentary foray.
Yeah. I mean, it's 50 years since those murders, because obviously Once Upon a Time in Hollywood marks like 50th.
Yeah, interesting how it happens to happen around the movie, is.
Yeah.
Interesting. It seems very timely that it goes up for sale just as the movie's coming around. I'm guessing the original owners that are there at the moment saw their opportunity because of the movie coming out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, mate. Unless they've been trying to sell it for some time. I'm just trying to have a look on tmz.com to see what they've said. It says the house was owned originally in 1969 by Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, who were murdered by Manson family members. Now, and I haven't looked to see whether it says about anything about the original owners. I can't see anything. It just says the name of the realtor for the property. So whether or not it's vacant and someone's just sold it, I don't know. So I don't know what the current owners are saying about this, but obviously they've sold it, so they must be over the moon to have sold it finally. But it's certainly an interesting story, and I think it's just one of those cases where we're going to have to watch this space, because we all know what Zach Bagans is like. I don't think that he would have just bought it for
nostalgic reasons of what happened.
I mean, to perhaps turn it into some sort of gruesome museum.
That I mentioned that earlier. I did think that maybe he would, to be fair, but I don't think it will be. I still think it will be down to a new documentary he's planning, which will be released in a couple of years' time, I would imagine. It's
got to be. I mean, I read something, like I said, about him doing some sort of spin-off series about serial killers or something, and or gruesome murders, and it sounds to be too neat that he would buy such a notorious property without linking that to that program. So we're just going to watch this space really on Zach Bagans. I'm no great fan of the man. In fact, I'm no fan of the guy. I don't think he has any real use in the paranormal field beyond the
entertainment show that he puts on.
So we'll just leave it there. Let's see what happens with that. I think the next thing we're going to move on to, as I mentioned, was Area 51. Apparently, more than 1 million people are saying they want to scale the fences and storm Area 51, which is the top secret Air Force base in the Nevada desert, isn't it?
Groom Lake and all that. And the only thing that caught
20th of September, apparently, or something?
Yeah, the only thing that caught my attention about this is that it was originally a joke that somebody put online by saying we should storm Area 51, they can't stop all of us, blah, blah, blah. But I think it took off a little bit more than the guy thought it was going to. And then more and more people started signing up to the petition that they were going to do this. And my first thought was, okay, this is going to be interesting, but ultimately you're signing your death warrants to the US Army, who are not going to mess around with people trying to break into their top secret base. I mean, me personally, I don't think Area 51 is a top secret base anymore. If there was anything, it's been moved quite some time ago when it gained some notoriety and people started knowing about it. So I think that went ages ago. If they did have anything there, if you believe in the UFO phenomenon of aliens and things like that, was supposedly kept there. People like Bob Lazar who worked there. I personally think that got moved. Probably most likely after the Bob Lazar incident where he came out. If he did generally work there, my instant thought, if I was in charge, was we need to get this away right now, because there's going to be people all over this. Not going to say, oh, we're fine, we're in the middle of a desert, who's going to care? Well, evidently everybody when that kicked off, because there was some massive media attention over that Bob Lazar story at the time, where people were trying to discredit him. Whether you believe him or not, the things he was saying were rather special. He was talking about a scanner that you put your hand on and it reads the bones in your hands.
Wow.
And he spoke about it, he told you what it looked at, and nobody believed him. Years and years and years later, I can't remember who actually tracked it down, but they got a photo of this and showed it and said, and Bob went, that's exactly what I was talking about. Sorry, mate. And it exists.
Wow.
That, for me, shows a lot of validity in what he was saying. Whether you actually believe he was working on alien craft, that's completely up to you. Make your own minds up. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. But the fact that 1 million people, they won't show up. Not all of them anyway. I'd be very it'll be interesting to see what happens though, because they've still got to go a couple of miles at least over ground before they get anywhere near it. And do they honestly believe
in 90-degree heat in the desert?
Do they honestly believe that the US Army is just going to go, oh come on, everyone go away? Of course they're not.
Well, according to this news article that I've got up, I'm just having a quick look through. Apparently, the Air Force says assisted assault would be dangerous, which is, they say, a description perfectly chosen to encourage those who believe what goes on at this hush-hush base is both suspect and probably malevolent. Signs posted around Area 51 note that trespassing will be dealt with harshly and that deadly force is authorised. So, if they're saying it will be dangerous for you to try and storm that base and they're authorised to use, real proper force to prevent you from getting in, then they won't have a problem with shooting people. All they have to do is shoot one person to prove a point and then the rest will back off.
Of course. And the thing is, I don't think it will take them long to react either. They've got some of the sensors that are there are amazing.
Oh yeah.
They're hidden. You don't know where they are. But I think as soon as one of those are triggered, a storm is coming to those people. I think they might want to rationalise it a little bit, what they're actually saying. They may think it's really funny, and they probably think, oh, we'll be okay. There's about 200,000 of us. They're not going to be able to stop us. Are you kidding me? Really?
Yeah.
Are you really that dense? Come on. If you're listening to any of this, people out there, take my advice, stay at home, have a cup of coffee and read about it in the paper.
It would be like somebody saying, oh, I don't know, let's storm Buckingham Palace for a laugh, and then there's a petition then for people to get together and do it. In this country, all of those people would be classed as co-conspirators. They'd all be arrested. They'd actually all be arrested now before they even did it.
Agreed.
Because under our legislation, it's seen as an incitement into some form of civil disobedience or disorder.
I'd be very surprised if you're not wrong already, because people are actually putting their names on this list. The US government's already all over this.
Yeah.
They're already over this. They'll be watching you as they speak.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They may be sitting and thinking it's a funny thing. It's not going to be funny. You are signing your death warrants.
Yeah.
Not all of you may get taken down, but as James said, some of you are going to be, just to prove a point.
All it takes is one.
Yeah.
And like I said, in this country, you'd be seen as a conspirator now. Whether you did it or not, you're planning and plotting something which would cause civil unrest or a criminal act. Our security forces monitor social media now.
Yes, there's algorithms as well for certain words that pop up.
You're being watched right now when you're on social media, and if you post something that is an incitement towards a breach of any of our laws, then it's likely that they will just take you down. They'll probably just arrest you now in the UK, whether you've done it or not. You'd be arrested and spoken to, whether that involves a caution or some form of custodial sentence, depending on what it is that you've done.
Well, to be fair, I'd rather take the custodial sentence than being shot on Area 51.
Yeah, it's crazy. And even if the people who are co-conspirators, for example, that have signed the petition or engaging in social media exchanges, decide that ultimately they don't want to go ahead with it, do they really think that internet history of those conversations won't be a lasting piece of reference material about that individual? They will be watched constantly now.
There are rumours that we're listened to anyway, just through your audio devices on your phone.
Yeah.
I mean, we did another podcast earlier on, and I didn't even mention anything, and Siri switched on.
Yes.
It's listening all the time.
Yeah.
And there's also, wasn't there something about Amazon's Echo, or whatever it's called?
Oh, yes.
Where that was also recording conversations and things like this. You weren't aware it's happening, but it's doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's a scary world we're beginning to live in, isn't it?
It is. There were smart televisions a few years ago that were recording people's conversations, or they'd switch their televisions off, and their microphones were still activated.
Wasn't also stories about the video cameras, the actual cameras in them as well, were actually watching them, so you could access them anywhere just by simple...
and just see people's living rooms and stuff like that. Crazy.
My God.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, final thoughts on that. Don't be stupid.
Yeah, exactly. It's really naive. I think it's really naive and stupid to assume that you can talk about breaking a law on social media. It's public. You've written it. It's not just the fact that you voiced it in the street or something where maybe if you're not overheard, you'll get away with it. But actually, you've gone on record saying that you're going to do something, and there are big risks that come with that.
Yeah,
and you live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Or in this case, you'll die by a very big gun.
Yeah, potentially.
I can't believe the stupidity of what these people are actually planning to do.
It's ridiculous.
I can't.
And 1 million people who are posting, their acceptance of that on a petition to say they don't want to go ahead. Like you say, it's doubtful that 1 million people would do it. Even if it's 10% of that, there's still a lot of people who are potentially going to go out into the Nevada desert or wherever it is, and potentially try and storm a highly top secret, well defended military base.
It doesn't look like it is, but believe me, that will swarm.
Yeah.
And it'll be airstrikes and things like that. Helicopters will be hovering over them.
Oh, it's huge.
I don't know what they think they're expecting to find.
And knowing the president, I don't know him, but knowing what kind of president we have, he's not going to take any prisoners.
No.
With something like that, especially if there is something to be concealed there. It's not top secret base for no reason. So there you go. So there's a few items that we've got there in paranormal news. Although some things, potentially Area 51 is a potentially paranormal site, but actually the issue is more than paranormal. It's actually very normal and very real.
Yes, absolutely. I just generally feel quite frightened for these people who are actually going to go do this. I just do.
Good luck to them. Let's see what happens.
I think we should move on because I'm starting to feel depressed at the idea that maybe 100,000 people may go to their deaths.
It's just ridiculous that they would even contemplate doing it. But this is the world we live in these days. So now we'll get into the main part of the Inner Sanctum. So we've got a few things that we need to cover today. So there are a couple of areas of phenomena that we want to talk about. So the first one was to discuss poltergeists. And what that really means. Now, you probably heard a previous show where I discussed with Steve Parsons about the definition of the term ghost and what that actually means, and how difficult it is to actually frame that. And the same goes for poltergeist phenomena, so we're going to be expanding on that. And then the second area of phenomena that we want to talk about is a really, really interesting phenomena, really. My jury is still out on this, and I guess Adie, yours is as well, which is electronic voice phenomena.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of our listeners has posed some really interesting questions about how we would define EVP and what we think it actually is, what's actually going on. So we'll cover that in some more detail and give our view. So thank you for putting that question forward. That's absolutely fantastic. And talking of questions, we've had some questions asked of us by another one of our listeners,
Louise. Who's been a friend of mine for a few years now, and earlier today and yesterday I put out a tweet asking if anybody wants to ask us any questions for the show, because I told them we were recording tonight, that they should send it to me and we would answer them on the show. We actually had a few sent by Louise. You can find her on Twitter, but I don't think she wants me to because it's locked, so I won't say your name, Louise. I know you're going to listen back to this because you asked me to tell you when it goes live. So, your first question to us was, what is your most memorable paranormal experience?
Interesting question. Really, really good question as well, because I think you remember paranormal experiences, and there've been a few for us, I think. You remember them for different reasons.
Yes.
Are there gradations of memorability? And when we talk about paranormal experience, are we separating that from paranormal evidence? Because there may be things that we didn't actually experience at the time.
Yeah.
But later on, when we review our evidence, we see that we captured something. Does that still fall under the umbrella term of experience? I guess it may do. Maybe the experience of being elated at having found something.
I think that footage that we captured certainly elated me at the time. That's definitely one of my most memorable things. So that was back on evidence review, though, when I recall watching it when you put it on, and you said, "You can see it, can you?" Like I was an idiot. And
this was like 6 years ago, isn't it? 2013.
Easily. So, but one of my most memorable experiences actually happened on the same investigation, which I believe was our first. I think was it our first? No,
June 2013. So it may have been our second. Was it? No, it might have been. Was it our first? No, it must have been our second.
It must have been. But we was at the Falstaff in Stratford, and I had gone down the stairs from the attic, and I can't recall why I went down, to be fair. I don't remember why I went down. I know you had just come back.
Didn't you hear something down there? Or we
That's
both heard
right.
some noises and you
That's
went
right.
to go
And I said, I'll go and have a look at what it
vision.
was.
Yeah.
That's it. And I got down to the bottom of the stairs and just kind of stood there looking out into the darkness. I couldn't see a thing. But I'm standing out there looking out into the darkness, and I heard what sounded like a shuffling of feet. I don't know, about 10, 15 feet away. And it drew my attention straight to it, where I ended up shouting up the stairs, because I love your reaction to when I said it, shouting up the stairs going, I've got movement down here. And you went, human or otherwise?
Yeah.
And I went, well, I don't think it's me.
Yeah.
And you went, cool. And that was the response.
Yeah.
But the thing that elated me was that when we played back footage and I said, I've got movement down here, there was, and it's going to lead into later, but there sounded like there was an audible response caught on the camera.
Yeah.
And on I believe on your recorder, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
That was quite special to me, because it was not only just a personal experience, but it was backed up by the equipment that you had running.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was pretty special to me, I have to say.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah.
The only other one I've got was where I don't believe in the SB7 spirit box,
No.
but I caught a wonderful EVP, which is actually backed up by the SB7, which kind of frightened me a little bit, if I'm honest. I'm like, what? Well, not frightened me, the wrong word, but it kind of made me widen my eyes a little bit, because when I played it back, because I was recording the session, you asked, where are you, in French.
Oh yes.
And
I remember this. Guy's Cliff, wasn't it?
it was.
Yeah.
You asked, where are you in French? How do you say, where are you in French?
Yeah.
And on the EVP, we heard a response.
Yes, we did.
which-
Yeah.
And I played this back to a friend of mine who speaks fluent French. And it was, I can't remember the exact words, but I think it's US2A, something like that.
Right.
And he says, oh, what it's asking you, Adie, is, where are you? But the spirit box, no more, could have been a millisecond later, also said, US2A.
Right.
So it was on the SB7, as well as a separate
Yeah, I remember that
EVP.
recording. Yeah.
Now, I lost this recording, so I'm pissed about that.
Yeah,
Pardon
yeah.
my language. But that was a really good memorable experience, because it kind of backed things up. And that was a direct, intelligent response to something you asked.
Yeah, exactly.
And the fact is that it was in French was even more special.
Yeah.
But according to my friend, he said this person isn't French, because he's speaking with an accent, which I
Right.
would tell you is English. He said, just by the way it was pronounced.
Oh, okay.
So there was like a multitude of things that
Yeah.
rolled, and I thought that was pretty special.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it?
What about yourself, Mr. James?
3 things.
Okay.
So I think the most memorable paranormal experience was let's frame this as well. We need to be careful about when we say paranormal, because at the moment we talk about paranormal things, but we've also talked about unexplained things, and a lot of what we talk about on this show and that we read about, actually, to be fair, is just unexplained.
Yes,
It
absolutely.
may be fully normal and natural, but we just don't yet have an explanation for it.
Yeah.
So, but if we're talking about unexplained phenomena, most memorable, like I said, 3 things. So the first thing for me would be the video footage that we recorded at the Falstaff Experience
Yeah.
back in June 2013. I've talked about this at length, I think, before in previous episodes, but it's where I think we accidentally captured on video a full-bodied, seemingly intelligent apparition, which to this day I can't fathom. It's just bizarre, the fact that it is in colour when the rest of everything else we were recording was in infrared. So that's bizarre. It also has a cross-reference to previously reported phenomena at that property. So there's been tales of a ghost of a little girl at that property. What we recorded appeared to be very similar to somebody of that sort of stature, seemingly female, young,
Definitely.
So possibly a ghost of a little girl. Possibly, but I had, possibly is double underlined in red. I think probably the next thing for me would be EVP. I was doing an investigation probably about 7 years ago at a property in Ulster, which was the shop that our friend Carl used to run.
Oh, his shop?
Yeah, in Ulster, yeah. And in the basement, I had a digital voice recorder set up. We were just doing a little vigil in there, calling out to whatever may be there. And I, in typical fashion, just said build up enough energy to communicate with us. And on my recording, there's what sounds to be a ghostly voice of a young female say "okay," and it's really clear. I've still got that recording, so I might be able to just mix that in with this later on. Maybe put it at the end of the show or something,
so people can hear it. I wish they could hear the ones I was talking about.
Yeah.
But they might be able to get one of them though, because you should still have the.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So there's that one, which is really unusual. It's in the basement. It's way below street level. It was in the early hours of the morning. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning. There were no young females in the property. Everybody else was quiet at the time. We all knew the location of all the other people that were there. There was probably only about 5 of us there in the property in its entirety, 2 of which were female, the rest were male. And to have that voice so clear on the recording is just really weird. So that's memorable for me. And I think the third thing really for me is, again, the same location but not on the same night. In that basement, hands on the top, just doing a little bit of a lone vigil, doing a bit of a vigil with Carl, and asking whatever was there to move the table.
Oh, you have footage of this?
Of which I've got video, infrared night vision video footage of, and the table moves maybe 2 or 3 feet in my direction from an angle where nobody was sat at. So it was almost like somebody was pushing the table towards us, and it would have required some considerable exertion from either of us to move it in our direction. It almost pinned me to the wall. I still find it compelling footage. I've had comments on Twitter about the fact that we were doing table tipping, but I won't go into that. We weren't doing table tipping, but the fact the table moved for me was really interesting. So those 3 things are the most memorable for me, and I think also the fact that they represent 3 different types of phenomena. So we've got visual and seemingly intelligent. We've also got electronic voice phenomena, and we've got psychokinesis, or some form of movement of a physical object by an unseen agent. So classic sort of poltergeist phenomena. So they're really the most memorable for me. So what's the next question from Louise?
The next question from Louise is, do you believe in the stereotypical version of a ghost? And she means apparitions in the forms of humans.
What are your views on that?
I have seen what I would consider to be a human form with my eyes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for me, I was probably quite hyped up on caffeine at the time.
Right.
Because back then I would drink a lot of caffeine, which would have impaired my judgment.
Was this an early hours experience on the way to work? This is what you talked about before?
Oh, not that one. I beg your pardon. Okay. I've had 2 experiences of seeing an apparition. One I've already spoken about on the Inner Sanctum, where I saw my grandmother.
Yeah, that was the one I meant. Yeah.
The one I was just about to speak about was actually in a very. It was a location in Bosworth, and I didn't tell anyone at the time because I wanted to keep it to myself. But I walked off on my own, as I tend to do, and I was turned to come down a hall, and I saw somebody walk into a room. What I thought was somebody in a room, and I shouted out, "Who are you? What are you doing in here? You didn't tell me you were coming down here." Blah blah blah. Walked over to where the room was. There's nobody in there. that was interesting. But like I said, I was pretty hyped up on caffeine, energy drinks, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought it must have been about 2 a.m. I'm tired. I'm full of caffeine.
Yeah.
And I kind of just like, oh, you're talking crap. You just saw something out of the corner of your eye. The other one was that we already spoken about on the Inner Sanctum. I saw the perfect outline with features on the face of my grandmother. So when people say, do you believe in ghosts? Yes, I do. But only the fact that I've got multiple things to back it up, as we've already discussed.
Yes.
I saw my grandmother, she was there, shocked me. And I've also caught EVP, which we're going to speak about later, of her voice. So yes, on this occasion I do believe in apparitions because I've seen them.
Yeah.
One I think I discount, if I'm honest, because of the caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
But the one of my grandmother, no, I don't discount because it was extremely personal to me.
Yeah.
And she had died not long before then, so you could say maybe she was on my mind, maybe I wanted to see her. I'm sure parapsychologists would tell me that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, the link to death and bereavement and the psychological effects of that.
But to me, no, she was there and we've caught her voice. So on that occasion, yeah, I guess I do. For all my, I'm going to call it whining. I sound like I'm whining sometimes online about things I'm going on about, but on this occasion, yeah, I do. I'm sure you're probably going to back up that statement with something for yourself. Having known you a long time, I know you will.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So yeah, I do. But I also believe in the apparitions of animals.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's not just human form. I'm not going to go into I'm not even going to mention that word that we're going to talk about. I don't believe in the monstrous look of things.
No.
That's a better way of putting it than the actual word.
Yes. Yeah. The grotesque.
Yeah. I don't believe in that. But as in apparitions of humans, yes, because I've seen one. I don't think it's stereotypical in any respect. I think it's just something that you see, and it just so happens. I mean, if it was something I didn't recognise as a person, mm-hmm. I would have gone, you know, because nothing ever happened.
Some sort of amorphous blob or something.
Yeah, but the fact that it was actually my grandmother, who I happen to... I'm not much of a spiritualist person, but I sometimes feel her around, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whether or not she's looking out for me would be a wondrous thing. I would love that. So yeah, I do. Yourself, Mr. James?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, since the age of about 2 years old, 18 months, 2 years old, I've been seeing things. Saw an old lady in my garden as a little boy, 2 years old. Used to go to see my mum in the kitchen, seen grandma in the garden. And mum would be like, okay, go out into the garden. Maybe my grandmother and grandfather had turned up unannounced, maybe. No one there. Spoke to my grandmother. No, she's still at home. Kept seeing this old lady in the garden.
What made you connect it to her being your grandmother?
Because she was just an old lady, and I was only like 2 years old. She looked a bit like Gran, you know, so I thought she was my grandmother.
I understand.
Happened a few times. My mum thought, this is getting too often now. He's not talking about seeing anything else anywhere else other than this old lady in the garden. Every few days I'd see this old lady at the top of the garden. And my mum got to the point where, and obviously my mum is a believer in paranormal phenomena as well, having seen stuff herself. She thought, oh, maybe he's seen something that maybe is real. So she spoke to my dad and said, he's been seeing this old lady in the garden, but when I go out there, there's nothing there. My dad thought it was unusual. Dad being a policeman, nosy, investigative, wants to find out more.
I wonder where you get it from, James.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So he spoke to the neighbours, and subsequently found out that actually at the top of the garden, which backed onto the bottom of another garden, the garden of a house opposite, the old lady that used to live at that house had passed away sometime before we moved in, so a few years before we moved in. And this elderly lady used to like going to the bottom of her garden and feeding stray cats in what is, or was at that point, our garden.
Oh, right.
So it sounds like I was seeing this old lady who was still going through her routine of going to see the stray cats and feeding those. So that was a really interesting validation of what I'd seen.
But which would also be called, and I hate to do it, a residual haunting.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, so almost like a recording more than an actual, intelligent sort of apparition. And again, that's a human. I didn't see the cats, but if we move on to apparitions of animals, totally seen my little boy Charlie, who passed away a few years ago now, back in like 2012, I think he died. Seen him and me and my wife both saw him at the same time one evening. Thought it was our cat Amy at the time, but actually she was under a table in the kitchen watching what we'd seen.
Was this back in your old house?
So my old house, yeah. We were at the bottom of the stairs in the hallway with the lights out. We were going to bed, and as I was moving towards the stairs, I went, "Oh, watch out for the cat!" and went sort of step over the cat. And my wife was doing the same thing at the same time, having seen the cat. And actually, we both thought it was Amy, but
it wasn't.
And we think it was actually Charlie because of the size of the cat. He was quite a big cat, big, strong cat. So we both saw him at the same time. We've seen him subsequent times as well, so we've seen him a few times.
Have you seen him in the new house?
Seen him here?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's brilliant. I love that.
Don't see him all the time. It's maybe once every few months. But
I have to say that's suggestive in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really unusual. But it's great.
I would imagine it is. I mean, I wish my dog Diefenbaker and Sasha would come back to see me occasionally. That would be nice.
It'd be great if you could see them.
It would, yeah. I think this is an interesting conversation. Thank you for asking this, Lou, because I think a lot of people who listen to the Inner Sanctum believe me and James to be skeptics, and we're not.
No. One thing I will say, just to jump on the back of ghosts as well, I had a really interesting experience at the age of about 22 years old in Glastonbury. Now, I was on holiday with my dad, so this wasn't a drug-fueled, drink-fueled party type experience. This was a caravan at the base of Glastonbury Tor. I used to go on holiday a lot with my dad as a young man. And one morning early, must be 6-ish, 6:30 a.m, something like that, I decided that I would go and have a walk to Chalice Well, which was only maybe about 5 or 6 minute walk up this lane into Glastonbury. Beautiful summer's morning, so sort of early July I think it was. It was gorgeous weather. And this is the weird thing. I was walking up this lane, and there was a row of terraced cottages along this lane. And as I was walking up this lane, sat on the wall of one of these cottages was a beautiful girl, long red hair, green sort of dress, looking at me as I walked towards her. And being sort of 21, 22, I thought, here we go, fantastic, she looks amazing.
Yes, holiday romance.
Yeah. I was walking towards her, and as I passed her, she said, "A man with a mission." And I turned to her and I said, "Yeah, I'm off to Chalice Well," and sort of smiled at her. And as I passed her, she said, "Yes, I know." So I thought, oh, she's entering into a conversation. Brilliant. So I turned back and she wasn't there. She completely vanished. There was no sound. She would have had to have moved from sitting position on a wall to going into a cottage, which would have meant running up the pathway, jumping off the wall, running up a pathway and going through a door and slamming and closing it, within a nanosecond. And this is literally the blink of an eye. She'd gone from sitting on a wall right next to me, like a foot away, to being completely nowhere to be seen. And that was the first time and the last time that I ever saw her. And it was an absolutely fantastic experience.
I can jump on this story, slightly different.
Right.
With my ex-girlfriend, it's got to be many, many years ago now, at least 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
We decided one day we was going to go to Stratford.
Right.
And I love walking around Stratford. Beautiful place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
this is Stratford-upon-Avon.
Oh, Stratford-upon-Avon, everyone.
Yeah.
And for anyone who knows, right next to the Avon, there's a huge park. And we got there quite early. And we decided we were going to walk through the park before we went into the town centre. And we were walking through, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. You know, holding hands, blah, 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 having a nice time. And we were walking, and I could see a man walking towards me. Well, it was just to the left of me. And my girlfriend at the time was looking straight ahead, blah, blah, blah. And I walked past, I went, morning, as you do. And he said morning to me. Didn't think anything of it until Sally turned round, the girl I was seeing at the time, said, who are you talking to? I went, what? She goes, there's nobody there. I went, turned round, she was quite right, there was nobody there.
So for her, you just said good morning to thin air?
Yeah. And to be fair, it's a big open area. It wasn't by trees or walkway.
No, I get what you mean, yeah.
Just gone. There was nothing there. And I went, oh, that's a bit weird, isn't it? I just carried on walking. So yeah, I guess I've seen a couple.
Yeah.
That was really interesting at the time. You just reminded me with the story you were saying. You're walking somewhere. I was like, actually, I remember this.
And it's just crazy how you can see somebody. And I've heard lots of stories from lots of different people about this kind of vanishing person phenomenon. It's not just like you see something that's kind of transparent, or it's see-through, sort of this shadow, or this floating grey lady, wispy, floating towards you. This is a person that, to all intents and purposes, looks solid. They're intelligent. They interact with you in one moment, and then the next moment they're just completely nowhere to be seen.
And to be fair, the more you can expand on that a little bit, let's theorise, because we love to do that on Inner Sanctum.
Yeah, of course.
Let's theorise. How do we know the wealth of people that you see are who we think they are?
Yeah.
If you're in a crowded situation, maybe in a town centre, maybe just like I was in a park, and there's loads of people, how do you know they're actually there?
Exactly.
Think on that.
Yes. I mean, this is like the millions of photographs that people take all around the world with their cameras and with their mobiles. How many of those people that they've snapped in that photograph are living? Have they got photographs of full three-dimensional, intelligent, full-bodied, solid-appearing apparitions that are interacting with other people, or maybe even not interacting, but you just don't know because you've just taken a picture and you assume that everyone in that image is living.
It's incredible to think about when you think of it that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I hope that's answered that question for you, Louise. We are going to
and also, so the answer to that question is yes, we do believe.
Yeah, but we wanted to give you stories. Right. So, your next question: have you ever found something unexpected at a location? I wasn't exactly sure what you meant by this question when I read it. To be fair, Louise, I'm not sure what you actually mean by unexpected. There was a story that popped into my head, but I'm not going to say this on the Sanctum. I don't know if there's anything you gathered from that question, James, because I wasn't exactly sure what she meant.
Yeah, I think probably for me, you can read into this sort of question in whichever way you like, but I'm guessing that maybe she meant, was there anything that occurred on an investigation that you didn't expect to happen? So, we go there thinking that we're going to investigate I don't know, poltergeist phenomena, but actually we see a full-bodied apparition, or something unexpected, like a stone just appears out of nowhere and just drops at your feet, or something like that. So
I can't say I have, not in that respect. I'd like to think I'm very observant when I'm out late, but certainly I'm very heightened to what's going on around me, but nothing's ever happened that's really been unexpected. I think in this particular field that we do, I expect the unexpected to happen. I know it sounds very cliche, but because that's what you're there for.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But you're kind of getting into the realms of cognitive bias now, aren't you? Which is you're kind of expecting something to happen, which then heightens your awareness.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I think, especially in my early investigations, of course, I was probably more like that. Yeah. So yes, at that point, I was very much expecting the unexpected. But then it didn't happen, which is why I am where I am now.
Yeah.
So in that respect, not really.
I'd probably say that, if I'm going to take her literally at her question, found something unexpected in an investigation, then that video footage of apparently of an apparition, we found that after the fact, but it was unexpected because at the time we went up into that loft room, or they called it the seance room at the Falstaff Experience, up the little wooden steps. At the time we all went up there, we saw absolutely nothing. So yeah, I have found something unexpected.
Yeah, I guess I've looked into it differently.
And I guess probably most paranormal researchers and investigators listening to this would probably say yes, they have. A lot of the time, it's on evidence review.
Yes,
so you find something unexpected, like a voice or a bump, or something unusual in terms of visual phenomena, whilst you're reviewing the evidence. You don't actually see it when you're there.
Yeah, I've always considered that the evidence review is just the second part of the investigation.
Yeah, it is, definitely.
I hear so many stories of people saying they don't enjoy doing evidence review and stuff like this, but for me, that's almost where the fruit of your labours come from.
Yeah.
Just because you didn't experience it at the time, but your recorders may pick up something. We've got some. I know you have, not we. You have got some amazing EVP from the Falstaff in particular.
That's some really interesting stuff. Yeah.
I mean, one of my favourites is us leaving the location and literally hearing a voice say, "Let's go downstairs," and you can hear somebody walk down the stairs.
Yeah, that was funny.
And then I think I was first back into the building because you hear me say, "Investigator entering the building," and then you hear something run up the stairs.
Yeah.
Now, to me, that was amazing and also very unexpected because in listening back on that makes you think, holy Jesus Christ, pardon my language, but there's something there.
Yeah, and also what else was going on.
Yeah.
And I think it opens a wider question, which is, and that's for everybody that's listening, which is, do you really know what is actually going on? You might not actually record anything on your footage when you come to do an evidence review. You may not experience anything while you're there. That doesn't mean that things aren't kicking off left, right and centre. It just means that maybe the methods that we're using are woefully lacking.
Agreed. But I think that's where your techniques, and I've certainly taken them away from me over the years, is by leaving your recorders running and just leaving things to do what they do.
Yeah.
Instead of messing around, carrying around a camera, just leave them to record.
Yeah.
And the wealth of a possible, I'll use the word possible, phenomena taking place, there's quite a wealth in there, and I just don't think a lot of investigators are interested in actually doing the review. They just like the thrill of being there.
I think you're right. There's a wealth of footage that you've got there. It's an onerous task to review all of that footage.
I find it exciting though, James.
It is great fun to do it, but I think that you really have to get into the mindset of. Like you say, it's part of the investigation. You're right, it's like a second investigation, and in fact, more often than not, it's more yielding in terms of detail. I wouldn't say evidence, because that's it's a debatable term to use, but it yields more detail than actually when you're there.
Agreed.
Because it shows you what you didn't see and didn't hear at the time you were there, because of maybe your fundamentally flawed human faculties, because you literally can't be omnipresent, you can't be in every room, so there will always be something that you're going to miss.
One of my favourite things that people say in investigation, we've all said it I think, it's really flat tonight.
Yeah. Until
you play back your audio and things like that, and then there's an absolute treasure trove of things that you just didn't get at the time because we can't hear it at the time. We didn't see it. You're walking around in the dark. You're disoriented. All these things come into play.
Yeah.
It's quite astounding.
It is. I always find it quite interesting, and I've moved away from this since I started. But classing it as evidence, evidence for what? And I think we have to really look at that term and be sceptical about and questioning about what we actually mean by evidence. Is it evidence, or is it, like I've just said, just detail? It's extra data, it's extra information, whether that's audio or visual, or sensory in terms of environmental data, in terms of data logging and stuff like that. It helps to give you a more rounded picture of the investigation than you would have just being there with a notepad and pen. Now, some people use the notepad and pen approach. That's fine, because if you're the only person that you want to convince that something that's going on,
then it makes perfect sense.
Then it's fine, because you're the only person that has to be convinced anyway. And if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But if you're looking at a wider audience, then you absolutely need to gather as much footage as possible and as much detail and data as possible. And using that evidence, in inverted commas, gathering methodology, excuse me, is the way to go, in my opinion. So I think to answer Louisa's question, yes, there's plenty of things that can be found, whether that's on the night or during the day or on evidence review. There'll always be something that's unexpected, and I think I'd argue that it should always be unexpected, because otherwise, like I said before, otherwise you slip into the cognitive bias trap, which is that you believe something's happening before you've got anything that supports it.
And I will openly admit, in my early days, I would very much fall into the cognitive bias statement. I would, but as the years has gone on, I'm not quite so easily led. That's just through experience, I think, and certainly where I'm going of late.
I think that you're probably... I know you are, because this is the journey that I've made as well, is that you're coming from a different angle now.
Yes, completely.
Which is, as opposed to, I know there's something there and I want to prove it, you're coming from, people say there's probably something here, and I want to see whether or not that is a reasonable conclusion to draw or not.
Yeah, I'd say so. We have one final question from Louise, and then we shall get on to the crux of the show. She says, do you research the history of a location before you visit?
Great question.
It's an extremely good question. For myself, no, I don't. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be influenced on anything that's possibly going on there or allegedly going on. I don't want to be told that there's a supposed ghost of John III or whatever happening at the location. I'd rather, if my equipment picks up anything or any names come up or whatever, then I can go back and try and link things that way. That's just how I do it. There's many other people that do it the other way around.
Yeah.
They will literally flip that. They will research the location first, and then we're going to say the words. They slip into the cognitive bias bracket, where they associate something they've got at the location, or they go around asking for the so-called spirit that's there by calling out the name that's been told them that's there.
Yeah.
I may have made that mistake in my early years, but I learned from that. If I'm honest, at least I grew.
Yeah, exactly. It's a journey, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So no, I don't. I tend to look at stuff afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Any history to the building that I can pick up of. There was a building I investigated not long ago, and I've still got to go and have a look at the place. But considering I still want to look, there was only one piece of anything I could connect to the area that may explain something that's going on, but it's very far-fetched. I would literally have to make a stretch to try and say that happened.
Right.
So, no, not really. I don't want to be influenced before I go on an investigation. I tend to tell people not to tell me anything about the location before I go.
Yeah.
I don't want to know. If somebody says, watch our video of this place, no, I don't want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I am.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure, I won't speak for you, but I'm pretty sure you're the same in that respect.
Yeah, I am. More often than not, probably 9 times out of 10, I'm the same as you.
Mm.
I think the only time that I would be slightly different and do some research before I go somewhere, and I have done this I think once, is where I'm deciding whether or not to actually bother to investigate a location. Where somebody's fed me some information and said, I'd like you to come to this property, etc. And I've looked into the history of the property based on the claims that are being made.
Yeah.
And actually thought, no, this sounds to me like it's a commercial ruse. That they effectively want me to draw a conclusion that they've already drawn. They want me to support their statement, as opposed to me to just go along and do what you do, which is research and then say, well, I found this, and then they correlate it with something they already know. They've withheld. as opposed to them saying, for example, this place used to be a prison, blah blah blah, and I do the research and I think, well, no, it didn't used to be a prison. This place has never been a prison.
So where did they get the idea from?
Exactly. This place is actually a folly that was built to resemble a property that looks like a prison, and somebody at some point has said it was the local prison that actually turns out to be further down the road.
Yeah.
So therefore I'm not going to bother because it's not what you say it is.
Yeah.
So when you say that there are the spirits of the prisoners in the basement where the cells used to be, and actually that place never used to be a prison, then there is no point investigating the ghosts of the prisoners because those prisoners were never there.
Yeah.
So it's those sorts of properties where I would investigate and research it before, in order to decide whether or not to go. But more often than not, I don't do it for the same reasons that you do. It's where I decide I'm going to go somewhere, as opposed to being asked, or somebody invites, or they suggest, and then I would do my research.
I have red flags that go up in some places where I've been. I won't tell you where I investigated, but I went along to this investigation, and the person that was there was agreeing with everything somebody was saying that was there, which to me set up a massive flag, because that doesn't make sense. Do you know what I mean? And for my gathering of my audio and visual, there was nothing there that would corroborate anything this person was saying.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that was right was that what the building was used for.
Right.
But for the things that this person was saying, because I think we were the first people in, or at least one of the first few teams that were in this place. So to listen to him literally say yes to everything that this person was saying, instantly, want for a better phrase, turned me off to the investigation, because my rationality and my mind kicked in and went, this doesn't sound right, Adie. Why would it make sense that this is happening? And
that you get so many correct hits in the delivery of seemingly random information.
So for me, that was enough for me to go, okay, I've got another 5 hours here. I'll do what I can do, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
And then upon review of all my evidence, no EVP, there was no visual phenomena that happened, there was a lot of cognitive bias going on from the people I was investigating with, apart from one who decided to follow me around for the evening. I quite enjoyed that, to be fair, but other than that, it was nothing there. So sometimes I guess it pays off not to do these things, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah,
because of the potential influences that
exactly. Me and James have mentioned influencing many times, and researching the history before you go is certainly going to influence your judgment while you're there.
Yeah, if you choose to go there.
If you choose to go there.
Yeah, definitely. So is that? I think that's all the questions now, isn't it?
It is. I hope that's answered some of your questions, Louise. And no, I'm not going to tell you why I'm not going to tell you that story on the Sanctum.
Yeah, but great question. So thank you for asking those. And if there's any other listeners that want to ask us questions,
yes, you can
then post them on Podbean, or get in touch with Adie on Twitter.
You can find me on Twitter. You can find me as Paranormal Doc, as one word, or the Paranormal Doctor. No, I'm not a doctor. I'm just a fan of Doctor Who. Before you all start thinking I am, I love Doctor Who. What a great show! Peter Capaldi, amazing. So yeah. We are now moving on to the two subjects we wanted to talk about. Yeah,
so one, I think I might have mentioned that before, that one of them, EVP, was actually raised by one of our listeners.
On Podbean, I read the question.
On Podbean, yeah. So he'd asked about what we thought was going on in terms of EVP. And the other one is a phenomena that is very close to our hearts, and that is poltergeist phenomena. So I think probably what we'll do is we'll cover EVP, because it's a listener generated question. I think it's really good that we can answer those questions.
I must say I love the fact that our listeners out there, we have to thank you for
absolutely
for getting in touch and actually asking these questions, because me and James sometimes think, that people are not really engaging, and it's lovely to see that people are beginning to engage, and it makes it feel worth it, you know?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's ultimately what this is all about. You know, we want to be able to reach out to our listeners, and the same for our listeners to reach out to us, and the more people that can do that, I think the more that we'll all grow as researchers. Asking a question often then leads to another question, which leads to a theory, which leads to a hypothesis, which ultimately then leads to a conclusion at some stage. So, it's all part of that. It's a process. That process, yeah, it's fantastic. So really, I think the questions asked about EVP, if I was correct, are: do we think that they are electromagnetic? Are they aural in the sense of within the ear, as opposed to something that is heard outside of our heads, that actually they're placed somehow in our ear, which causes us to hear them? Or are they audible in itself? Were they the three areas that we were asked?
Yes, we were asked.
Can you find that question?
I've got it. We were asked by G. Stadolski. Forgive me if I pronounced that incorrectly, sir. It says, "Hi guys, I would like to hear you do an episode specifically on EVPs, debating whether EVPs are oral, suboral, or direct manipulations of the electromagnetic field on the microphone of the recording device." I thought that was an intriguing question.
Yeah.
I know I've got a couple of views on that particular way. I do happen to think, with some research that's been done lately, that some of it may be straightly on the cochlea of your inner ear. Mm-hmm. I know there's some research that's taken place.
So that would be the suboral.
The suboral, because there are, I believe, I know I've heard a couple of things that I know people haven't heard at the same time, where I can go, "You sure you didn't hear this?" But it's backed up by my recorder.
Right. Which
is really interesting. I don't know whether that's because I've got ears like a dog or something.
Yeah, it might be. You might be able to hear.
You know.
You might be one of the only human beings that can hear infrasound. And I'm going to bring up the term suboral because I don't want to do this listener a injustice by not getting the definition correct.
And we'll start discussing what is not.
Because I think it means that it's within. Let's have a look here. We'll just bring up Collins Dictionary. Okay, so I think I was right. So we're talking about below the ear, so suboral. Let's have a look and see if there's anything else. If anybody offers an alternative. Yeah, so under the ear, below the threshold of hearing. So that's effectively what we think. So it's not something that is within the audible frequency in the sense that it's something that you can hear going off around you. It's actually something that happens within the inner ear. And then oral, obviously, is something that we can actually physically hear. And then the electromagnetic, the manipulation of the microphone, I think the question was, wasn't it?
I have an interesting story about actually hearing an oral. I was at Tilstock,
okay.
RAF Tilstock. It's an open area, you don't get in trouble for being there. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of old buildings. I was in there with a few other people, and the crawlers are going. We're doing a vigil, and we're sitting there, and all of us heard a female speak out really loudly that it resonated around the room.
Right, okay.
Upon playing back my digital recorder, because I did it immediately, because I thought that's amazing, after we checked out there was nobody there was nothing on the recorder.
Right. So that was seemingly audible.
That was audible.
But
not
is
picked up.
Probably likely to be suboral.
Yes. Because it was not picked up on the magnetic of my audio recorder.
And it was of the same sort of loudness as ordinary human dialogue?
Absolutely, but even louder, because the room's rather large. There was myself sitting in the seat, we took my own chair, and it came from the left side of where I was sitting, the right side from where the other people were sitting, but we heard it very loudly, like somebody shouting in, which made us think there's somebody else here. Mm-hmm. Being an open area, you would think it was.
Can you remember what they said?
Not off the top of my head. It wasn't really words, if you know what I mean.
Right.
It was like that, which made certainly.
So it was an outburst of some sort of. But it sounded human.
Yeah.
Right.
It wasn't an animal.
Okay.
I did think at the time it might have been a fox, but I don't think it was, because this was pretty... It was in the room, and the room's lit up. There's nothing standing there to my knowledge. There was nothing ran off, you would have heard it. It's all concrete. But the bit that I found interesting was the fact that it wasn't on the recorder.
Yes.
But
you all heard it.
But we all heard it.
Right. See, that's interesting in itself, because if we're talking about it being potentially subaural, that means that it's able to be picked up within the ear of all of the witnesses, as opposed to just one single witness. So, in effect, it's audible to all witnesses, yet it's not sound in the traditional sense.
Yes.
Because sound, as we know, is the vibration of air particles.
Yes.
And depending on the direction of the air particles, like with carrying winds or heat, humidity, all has an effect on the way sound carries, because it's a frequency. But that doesn't seem to apply if it's subaural, because it's placed directly into your ear. So it doesn't require the vibration of air in order to make a sound.
That's true. Is it Stephen Mara who's been talking about that the research he's been doing of late is the finding?
Oh, this is Mira, isn't it? Is it the guy that investigated the bottle poltergeist?
He did, and that's why it reminded me when we were talking about Superior, because he was talking that through the research they did, it was happening within the cochlea of the ear,
right? And
they tested that to see if that's what it was happening, because one person heard it, but the other person didn't, and neither did the recorder.
Right.
But it was loud enough for him to think there was something going on, wasn't it?
Interesting.
That's what I thought. Very interesting.
That is really interesting, because I always thought that sound gets into the way that you hear sound. I understood, and forgive me, listeners, if I've got this wrong, but I always thought that it was to do with the vibration of air particles in the atmosphere, which then causes the hairs inside your ear to vibrate, which then carries the sound into your cochlea, which then in turn sends a signal to a nerve within your...
I thought it was a bone.
But it sends a signal to your brain, which your brain then interprets the sound using that. Now, if that is required in order to generate hearing, so we won't call it generate sound, because sound is the source, but to generate hearing within a human or any other living animal potentially that's got the same physiology, then does removing vibration of air particles and all the stuff that's going on in your ear, apart from the cochlea and the little tiny little bones that move around, if you remove that air element to it, what's going on to produce a sound within your ear without the vibration of air particles?
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, or is it infrasound that's been manipulated in some way that you can't hear it because it's below the level of human hearing frequencies, which I'm guessing is what our listener meant in terms of
does he believe it's infrasound?
That it's lower than, I'm not sure what it is it 20 megahertz or something? I can't remember what the level is, but is it potentially below that, but it's still vibrating in the air, it's just that we can't hear it? Or is there something physiological going on in our ear that a entity, for want of a better term, is able to manipulate in order for us to hear? Because people do say things like they heard somebody whisper something in their ear. No one else can hear it, but they hear somebody really close whispering. Now that could be an argument to suggest this subaural phenomena, couldn't it?
Or could it be the fact they're just hearing it in their head?
Exactly, but in that phrase, hearing it in their head, they actually are. We do anyway.
Do you know what I mean?
Me in your head.
I investigated the kegs in the Neaton,
right?
And we were upstairs as a music room, and I heard someone say, I thought it was one of the team talking, but I heard quite clearly somebody say "boom,"
right? Just
the word "boom." And I literally turned and looked at them and said, what's boom mean? Because I don't know what they were saying, because I was doing what they were. Adie, we haven't said anything. Okay, that's interesting, and walked off. But I clearly heard it.
BWM.
BWM.
Explosion
boom.
noise.
But nobody else heard
Not
it. But they were only a couple of feet away from me.
Right.
And it was quite loud.
Yeah.
So for me, they should have been able to hear what I heard. Then that's why I asked them, were they talking about? No, we didn't say a word.
So that's a potential argument for subaural.
It's potentially subaural, but I think what he might be saying is there's a multitude of different versions of what we're having.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not too sure if it. I think some of it is infrasound, if I'm honest.
Yeah,
I mean,
agree.
I haven't overly researched into infrasound. I should really. I need to step up my game a bit, but
effectively ultra low frequency
yeah,
sound.
ultra low frequency.
Yeah, it's just sound that we can't hear.
Exactly, and then you could argue that the dogs hear it, and that's why they respond in a certain way. So really, we should be developing devices that can hear like a dog hears.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Maybe we should be developing cameras that do the same, because apparently animals get.
Yeah, apparently so. Yeah.
So if we can recreate it, then you've effectively got a camera and an audio device that literally can see and hear everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Maybe they have, and we just haven't seen it. But
yeah, exactly.
I've always found EVP fascinating from many different respects, because I think some of it is the listener misinterpreting what they're hearing on the device, and I generally believe that. Excuse me. I do happen to think of something you said recently, which I also agree with, that it could be bouncing around radio waves.
Mm-hmm.
That somehow ended up onto our recorders.
Yeah. Certainly from the electromagnetic perspective.
Certainly from the electromagnetic. We do know that radio signals travel an awfully long way. They
last a long, long time. There's radio frequencies out in space that are from our planet.
And they're still going.
Exactly.
You know, they might be from 1960, but they're still going.
Yeah.
I do happen to think that some of that gets picked up on your recorders. I do think there are different levels of people's hearing where your hearing is slightly better, and you may be hearing some. My hearing is generally terrible in a crowded situation.
Yeah,
it's awful. Somebody could be where you are now. If it's really noisy, I will struggle to hear what you're saying.
Yeah,
put me into a quiet location, I can hear a pin drop because I'm focused,
exactly.
But it's really difficult. Do I believe that everything's on the inner ear? No. I just think there's a multitude of different ones that's going on. That's what I actually think. I think a lot of people rely too much on their recorders to pick up on these things.
Yeah.
I understand why. If you want to play it back as we were talking earlier on as evidence, but ultimately it's going to be very difficult to project that as evidence. And I don't think people get that. This is our evidence. Well, not really. I'm sorry. I don't mean to upset you all, but it's not.
It's footage. That's all it is, really.
That's exactly what it is. I don't know. I don't think I understand enough. I mean, I'm reading Callum E. Cooper's and Steve Parsons' book, Paraacoustics.
Yeah, great book.
And it's amazing, and I'm
a very detailed book as
very
well.
Hard.
That's a big shout out to Cal and Steve. Actually, it's a fantastic work.
It's a brilliant book.
Yeah.
I'm about halfway through because I have to keep putting it down because it keeps making me go, oh, you know what I mean? But I will finish that book. If anyone wants more answers on it, I suggest you read that book.
Definitely.
Spend the time, get the book and read it. Don't give up because you don't understand certain elements of it. I'll openly admit I didn't understand all of it. I've had to cross-check some of these and go, oh right, that's what it means, okay, and gone back on it.
They do, to be fair though, they do explain quite a lot in really good layman's terms though, don't they?
They do. I mean, I'm not overly... I like to think of myself as intelligent, but it's not something I've really looked into. This is, for me, like a foundation course for me.
Yeah.
So I can get a more better understanding and what better book to read than Paraacoustics. Again, shout out. I don't know about EVP in an overtly way where I can sit there and honestly say this is what I think it is without contradicting the things I know. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's very limiting to say EVP is this.
Agreed.
When actually we don't. Again, we talked about ghost phenomena. We're going to talk about poltergeist phenomena as well soon. Define it, right?
Yeah.
Define EVP. Now, to a researcher, to a general researcher in the paranormal field, if you said define EVP, they'll tell you that it's electronic voice phenomena. Okay, well, is it electronic? Okay, how is it electronic? Because, for example, it's only electronic when it's detected or recorded by an electronic device.
Yes, on your recorder.
If it's oral and suboral, it's not electronic. So it's not EVP. It's not even EVP.
No, you'd be classed as
what? It's just VP, it's voice phenomena.
Yeah.
Or, if you want to be broader, which I think we should be, it should be SP, sound phenomena, or AP, audio phenomena.
Yeah.
So it's really just dealing with sound, irrespective of the manner in which it's recorded. So if it's recorded on an electronic device, then yes, it should be classed as EVP. But actually, if it was audible at the time, it's not EVP. Because the only time that, in my opinion, the only time that EVP is where it is electronic in origin. And we don't know that any EVP is electronic in origin. All we know is that an electronic device recorded it. That doesn't mean it was electronic or electromagnetic in origin. So again, I'm going to be, I do this a lot, and I know you, Adie, you do this a lot. I'm going to be challenging, as I do on the Inner Sanctum, challenging these definitions and these terms, because to me, EVP isn't electronic.
No, it's not. It's just the form of how it was taken.
If I capture some strange gunk in a bucket, right? Some strange paranormal gunk in a bucket, but I don't know what it is. The receptacle is the bucket. I'm not going to call it bucket phenomena just because I've captured it in a bucket. That doesn't help me describe what's in the bucket. And EVP is the same. The device you've used, actually, until we can prove it, is irrelevant.
Yes.
We have to define what it is first.
And also what the source of the noise was.
That's what I mean. We have to define what that sound is. Whether it's recorded on an electronic device, or it's audible, or subaural, or whatever it is, the device is kind of secondary to that, unless the device is the root cause of it. In which case, if the device becomes the root cause and it's no longer paranormal, so it has no seeming intelligence, and maybe it's a defect with the device, then we should just smash that device and not use it ever again. And we should consign EVP to the history books, because it's not the device, it's the phenomena. So it's not bucket phenomena, it's gunk phenomena, and it's that's the most important thing that we should be researching.
Agreed. And there should be changing the definition of it, is what you're basically saying.
Yeah. So that listener asking those questions has really, I think, been very clever about their questioning, because
and the way they've questioned it.
Yeah, because I think they've said, what do we think EVP is? Is it oral, suboral, or manipulation of the electromagnetic pickup on the microphone? Well, actually, I think they probably know that if you can hear it, it's not EVP.
Yes.
Because you may not even have a device, an electronic device to record it on, so it can't be electronic. Unless it's a manipulation of airwaves from an electromagnetic source, in which case you can argue that EVP is an audible form of lightning, for example.
Yes.
Because it's electromagnetic in origin. But we don't know that yet, so I think it's dangerous to call it EVP.
I think you're quite right. And you're right. I think this guy asked if it is a guy, asked a very intelligent question.
Yeah, I think that question was posed in that way because they wanted to see whether or not we would fall into that trap of electronic voice phenomena.
Which I don't believe we did.
No, absolutely not. Because we've thought about EVP long and hard. And EVP comes under that broader umbrella. There's a lot of umbrellas. It's like an umbrella shop.
Yeah, we were discussing this before we started the show.
EVP comes under ITC, so Instrumental Transcommunication. Right, so the communication, this is a definition in my own words, the communication with spirits using instruments.
Or man-made devices.
Yeah, exactly. But But that in itself is limiting, because let's say, for example, we just make this an empty room and we get rid of all of our devices, but we can still, like you did, you heard something in that room. Let's say that you responded to that noise and asked it to do it again, and it did.
Yeah.
Right? Ignore the fact there are any devices there. Remove them. Just have you sat in an empty room talking to an alleged spirit. Right? You can hear that spirit if it is one. Let's assume it is. And you're communicating because it has some form of intelligence. You ask it a question, or you make a request and it responds. That to me is an intelligence, and it's a communication. Is that still ITC? Is that trans communication? Do you need the instrumentation in order to do that? So, does the instrumentation limit us? Because if we're communicating with a spirit, for example, and we're doing it in an audible manner, why do we need it to be ITC? It's not. We're just communicating through devices.
That's right.
But we only think we're communicating. We don't know we're communicating. Then why do we think we're communicating? Because we think we're getting intelligent responses. Are we falling into the trap of cognitive bias again? Which is, but also not necessarily cognitive bias in that sense, in the sense that we've already drawn a conclusion, so therefore anything that we're presented with then helps to support our already drawn conclusion. But are we falling into the trap of anthropomorphism? So are we assuming that everything around us has or can have attributable to it human qualities? So I make a request, I get a response. That's a very human thing, other than like with a dog sit or whatever, you get a response.
To be fair, people put that anthropomorphic thing onto animals anyway.
Oh, on so many things.
But basically, a lot on animals, really.
Yeah.
You think because a dog or a cat does a thing, it's because they understood you. Not really.
Yeah.
They respond in that way because they know, especially dogs, they'll respond in a certain way because they know they'll get something from it.
Yeah, well that's like Pavlov's dogs, isn't it? With his experiments about, he trained some dogs that whenever he rang a bell, they would come and he would feed them.
That's right.
And over time, he decided that he would remove the food but still ring the bell. And he rang the bell, they started to salivate because they thought that the bell meant food. So this is this conditioning. And I think where we're getting into is that, you know, we could go one step away from that, which is that, you know, you communicate with an animal, you tell it to sit and it sits down. Yeah, it might have some intelligence there, but the anthropomorphism is to attribute human qualities to anything, not just an animal.
That's right.
You know, we call boats she. You know, a ship is called she. You know, why do we call it she? It's not, there she blows for a whale. Yes. You know, all these sorts of things. We also have, you know, as children, we have toys. Just because a doll, a collection of sewn up rags, resembles a human doesn't mean it's going to behave like one. It's just material that we've shaped. So I think that it's really dangerous, but it's also very natural for us to assume human qualities to the world around us, because that's how we kind of make sense of it, because we see it in our own terms. It's the human lens that we see the world through.
Our perception.
Exactly. And I think that probably a lot of seeming communication also falls into this anthropomorphism trap, that we think that because we're getting a response, therefore it's like us, it knows what we mean, it's a human. You know, oh, it's knocked a few times, or I go and I get back. Now that could just be a random response or a house settling, but because we hear the after the,
which is something that many people do.
Exactly, but we assume that that's a human, because only a human would know that comes at the end of. But that could just be a random noise, but because we get a response, or we think we get a response like that, that is a human entity. So this is anthropomorphism, and I think that helps to, or say helps, it also hinders for us to make judgments again about what it is that we're actually experiencing. So, you know, going back to what I said about the terms in terms of ITC, EVP, what are they? I'm challenging this again. Is EVP a real response? Yes, I heard what I thought was a little girl say okay, and I've got that recording and it sounds like a little girl saying okay. But is that because I'm a human and I hear two random noises together which sound a little bit like okay, and my brain says that says okay, so I hear it like that and I've been conditioned to hear it that way? I don't know. So it's really difficult to even think of EVP as a voice. The V part of EVP, is it a voice? Or is it just a noise? Is it just a sound?
I mentioned it earlier on that I think a lot of it is misinterpreted by the person who's listening back on the audio.
Yeah.
I know.
And other humans.
Yes.
Not just you listening to it. Somebody that sits next to you and hears it might go, that says get out. And you just think that's because we're both humans and we're both thinking that way.
I found the best way to listen to it is to have multiple people listen back on it, but don't tell them what you think it said. And if they hear something similar or the exact same to what you said, then I found it more interesting.
Yeah, there was some research done on that fairly recently, where certainly within the last 30 years, I think, where they found that if they tell you what a voice says, you'll hear it. But if you're not told, you'll just hear a jumble of noise. But the moment you're told, also they found, and I can't remember the name of the researcher that did this, but he used non-human sounds, so he used mechanical sounds that actually sound like a human speaking. But all it is just mechanical sounds, but they actually sound like a voice. And I wish I could remember the guy's name. You can search for it. I think there's a video on it on YouTube, or might have been even on a BBC Radio 4 programme that I listened to, where they gave some examples, and it's just mind-blowing to think that this was artificially created noise that sounds like a human.
But it's just the way our brains interpret the sound.
Exactly.
Which makes a lot of sense when you sit back and think about it. I know there's a few, what I would be considered, I've caught a voice, where I've listened to it a while afterwards and gone, no, that's not what I thought it was. And you go, oh, that's a shame.
It's disappointing, isn't it? But ultimately, if you can discount something, that's actually more valuable than just saying everything that you hear is EVP, because you know that the law of averages dictates that the majority of it isn't going to be, and actually just fooling yourself. And others if you promote it as being evidence for something.
As I said, and I put it on my Twitter pinned tweet, that I think a lot of what people are perpetuating as EVP is audible nonsense. And I think unfortunately their cognitive bias of what they believe was happening is kind of seeped into what they're hearing, which is probably audible pareidolia, if I'm openly honest, and I am. That's what I think a lot of these are. I think a lot of it's subjective and how you interpretate what you're hearing. For me personally,
I agree.
That's what it is. You've already spoken about it in length and much more eloquently than I ever will. But I think you're quite spot on with that analogy of how you put it, if I'm honest. And I completely agree with you in that respect.
But some, there's always that hope, and I think hope is a very human trait anyway, to cling to something that you think that maybe somebody somewhere has recorded something that actually is.
I've already spoken about the EVP from Guy's Cliff. Now to me, and I'm really annoyed that my computer crashed and I lost this EVP. That to me was special just for the fact that it wasn't me that just heard it. It was caught on two different devices. One of them I don't agree with, but it seemed to pick up the interference. It responded directly to what you said, and I've had somebody who speaks fluent French tell me that's what it said. I didn't know what it said until I gave it to him to listen to.
Which is, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's still, you can't draw a conclusion from that. All you can say is that at the moment it remains unexplained, but it's compelling.
It's extremely compelling. It's things like that keeps pushing me on, if I'm honest. I almost gave up on EVP a few years ago. I really did.
It's because it's so open to interpretation. That's the problem, isn't it?
I think once you realise that it can't really be taken as evidence, then you kind of feel like you're wasting your time with it.
Yeah, exactly. But to be fair, what can be taken as evidence?
I know I started feeling like I was wasting my time with it. I still do it because, to be fair, I quite enjoy listening back on it. I love the evidence review, or just playing back my audio and like listening to these podcasts. I like to listen them back.
Yeah, of course.
You know, so I hope we've answered his question.
I hope so. I think my last thing really is the electromagnetic side of his question.
Yeah.
If it is the manipulation electromagnetically, a manipulation of the microphone. Now this comes back to what you said on a previous episode about when you die you get superpowers, or something that your girlfriend had asked, which is a really great question.
Yes.
And my question back to the listener about the question of the manipulation of the microphone on electromagnetic in an electromagnetic way is how do we think that an entity may be able to do that, and why would they do that, and where did they learn to do that?
Agreed. I actually have a story.
Okay.
I was told by this psychic medium. I hate to mention it, but I found it kind of interesting because I asked, you know, you telling me you've got this connection and they can answer your questions. How does the voice happen? We don't hear it. Is it because it's below a certain decibels, infrasound, blah blah blah?
Yeah.
And he said no. What actually happens is the thought, and this is where it went a bit strange for me. The thought is placed onto the EVP. I went, what?
Okay.
Yeah, I made the same face you're making at me right now. He says the thought is placed onto your recorder. I went, that don't make sense to me. He says it may not be the spirit because sometimes it's you. I went, what? And what he meant was that we may subconsciously be answering the questions ourselves when you're speaking out, and somehow through PK perhaps it's put on.
Oh, okay.
On the device.
So maybe our brainwaves
is somehow
being recorded.
Yeah.
That's an interesting theory. I wonder where that comes from.
I don't know.
What the scientific background
I don't know where he got the idea from. All I know is it made me make the same face you made at me a second ago.
The raised eyebrow.
Yeah, which I think I was probably more polite about at the time.
Right.
If I'm honest.
Yeah.
Where I kind of walked off going, what a load of...
It's certainly an interesting thought.
It is, but I still kind of walked away and kind of in my head, which didn't end up on my recorder, chuckling to myself.
Yeah, I think that the thing is with... just to touch on that, with the statements that are often made by people who put themselves up as being, you know, gurus or some form of knowledgeable expert or enlightened person, like an alleged psychic medium, for example, is that they can tell you that the spirit can place the thought, or you can place the thought, maybe subconsciously and unwittingly, on a recording device. But they can't go any further than that and explain that maybe if an entity has told you, you know, if an entity tells me, for example, if I have these powers and they were real, and a spirit told me, I can place my thoughts onto an electromagnetic recording device, my next question would be, how?
Agreed.
And then if they can explain that to me, because they're, you know, they're a deceased human, they can talk to me, for example, irrespective of whether I will understand what they're saying to me, I can still write it down.
Agreed.
You know, if Stephen Hawking, rest in peace, was alive and I said to him, explain quantum mechanics to me, please, and he explained it to me, and I hadn't got a clue what he was talking about, but I could write it all down and tell a scientist this is what he said, they would read it and go, wow, I understand this. Why have these entities never told these psychic mediums, I'm going to tell you now how I do this, write this down, and then pass it to a scientist so that they can replicate it?
Could it be because they're not actually asking the right questions if they are indeed hearing these spirits? Because
There must be at least one there. I mean, the past 200 years of psychic mediumship in its some culture that we've got.
I agree. I mean, some of I've spoken to multiple people who claim to be psychics over the years,
and
they've all got multiple versions of what is happening.
Yeah, it's their own personal interpretation,
which makes me,
isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Which means if they were all singing from the same hymn sheet on there, I would probably pay a bit more attention.
They'd all say the same thing, wouldn't they?
Of course they would.
And they'd use the same terminology and everything.
If they're actually speaking to the spirits of the dead, then really they should be saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I worked on a place, 2 psychic mediums there, and they said that they could hear this spirit talking. And what I wanted to do, and I didn't have another pen and paper to hand, I wanted to separate them and then say, write down what you're hearing. But the thing that I found interesting when I questioned them about it, because not one of them matched when they were talking.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't make sense. Are you hearing this? Sometimes as psychic mediums work on different frequencies, so we don't know, but you've just told me you're both hearing this spirit speak.
Yeah.
So, because why aren't you cross-correlating and saying exactly the same thing? It doesn't make sense to me, because I spoke to them separately. I says, why? And neither of them can give me an answer other than that, we both pick up things in a different way. Which set off alarm bells again.
Yeah, it's the whole the stars aren't in alignment. It's not the right test. It's the same answer that you get time and time again. It's never a consistent message, is it?
Agreed.
And it goes through that filter. If it's pure in source, at some point, if it's real, then these mediums aren't helping if they're real, because their filter is contaminating a pure message that they're supposed to be saying.
Agreed.
So even though I don't believe in psychic mediumship, I still think the principle of it should be like you say. They should be telling you identical things if they're speaking to the same entity, and they never do.
Agreed. And that should send up a red flag, a balloon, fireworks, whatever you want to put it. That I actually got my digital recorder out. This is why I'm relating this back to the question the guy was saying.
Yeah.
And if you generally believe that your recorder can pick up, because they're saying they could hear it audibly.
Yeah.
They're literally having a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, if you're hearing this audibly, then theoretically my recorder should be able to pick it up, is what was running in my head at the time.
Yeah.
And there was nothing on there.
No. So it might be subaural.
It might be subaural, which is where I was going.
Yeah. But even if it's subaural, but it's subaural to 2 individuals, they should still be hearing the same thing.
Yes.
But they're not.
And then that begs the question is, if the audio waves are not moving through the air as you put it, how are they both hearing it in their inner ear?
Yeah.
And how is this alleged spirit able to split and then speak to both people, but only they can hear it?
But also, if it was you, for example, as an entity talking to 2 spiritualist mediums, and they were hearing you subaurally, but you were speaking to both of them like, okay, you two, I'm going to tell you how it is, right? Yeah. They should be able to hear exactly the same thing, because they're in the same room listening to you. But the thing is that they're not. They're saying, I'm getting this from him. The other medium's saying, I'm getting this from him. Well, unless you can split your voice into 2 things and lie to one and tell the truth to the other, for example, or tell them 2 different things at once, which wouldn't make any sense if you wanted to try and choose the most direct and simplest route to a coherent communication. You wouldn't try and complicate it. You try and simplify it. So I just don't believe that self-proclaimed psychic mediums actually hear what they say they hear. I think they hear what they believe they're hearing, or they hear what they want to hear, because they're fantasists.
I think a lot of them are, I think you're right, fantasists. Me and James have said many times, we don't believe every person out there is like this. I think I've been unfortunate to work with a few that aren't what they say they are.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately for them, I'm not very trusting of something unless there's something that's been said that I know that makes me go,
yes.
So what did you say? And then I'll pay more attention to it, and that has happened.
Yeah.
with one guy that I used to kick around with.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not quite sure.
No, your jury's still out.
No, my jury's out.
But we're in danger of going off topic, aren't we?
Yeah, which happens a lot.
We're talking about spiritualist mediums now, but getting back to the whole audible side of things and the sound-based part of it, it's very limiting to talk about it in terms of electronic voice phenomena.
Agreed.
If indeed it is electronic. So thank you for the question. Great, ask us more questions, because as you've heard, that really did prompt a lot of discussion around that topic.
I really appreciate the question, and please give us your feedback if you'd like us to try and expand on it.
Definitely.
And I will do a bit more research into it before I answer the question.
It was a great question.
My EVP knowledge is not as high as it should be, because I haven't really paid much attention to it since I've started.
To be fair though, there is so much.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, there's really, I'd say, 3 people that I would recommend reading information on, books published by people about EVP.
I'm guessing Mr. Bayliss is one of them.
Well, there's a little bit of there's Rogo and Bayliss.
Yeah.
I would include those together, because
Okay.
Phone Calls from the Dead is really like the main one. Next person is Annabella Cardoso.
Oh, amazing.
So
is that still happening, by the way?
yes.
Excellent.
So Annabella Cardoso, she's written a couple of books all about EVP. Fantastic. Really interesting theories, really interesting research, also notably backed up by Professor David Fontana from Society for Psychical
Yes,
Research.
I know exactly the story you're talking about too.
So a great source of information. There's also a pamphlet that was written in the 70s. Their surname is Harsch-Fischbach, and that in itself is great, because that doesn't just go into ITC and EVP specifically, also looks at the video ITC as well, recurring infinite loop video communications and stills from that as well, the whole white noise experiences and stuff. So so a really good source of information there. So anybody wants to read up on EVP that hasn't already done so, I would recommend those sources of information. You can also go onto the ITC journal online, search for ITC journal, you'll find it straight away. And that is just packed full of research and experiment information, notably, like I said, pamphlets by Harsch-Fischbach, and also Annabella Cardoso's research. And also, I can't really talk about EVP and ITC without mentioning the likes of Konstantin Raudive, and also Friedrich Jürgensen. There's so many people that are out there researching now, so go off, have a look, read as much as you can about it, because it's a really interesting subject and a very weird subject as well. So that's EVP covered. The last thing we really wanted to talk about today was poltergeists. And I thought long and hard about poltergeists, because I've read a lot of stuff on poltergeists. The first thing I really got exposed to on poltergeists was Enfield.
Yeah, me too.
As most people do. Poltergeist phenomena has really stemmed from the Enfield case, especially for people in the UK back in the 70s. And poltergeists have kind of sprung up all over the place down through the ages. But I think the thing that I wanted to talk about poltergeists today was just the sheer volume of phenomena that comes under that umbrella term. And just to name but a few: spontaneous fire, spontaneous water, noises, the movement of objects, sometimes violent physical assault, voice phenomena, apparitions, apports, or the appearance, disappearance and reappearance of physical objects passing through other physical objects, for example something locked in a chest being removed, or something being shut in another room passing through a door and appearing on a table. Really interesting phenomena. Apports are really fascinating. Read a book called Jott, Jott, by Mary Rose Barrington of the SPR. stands for just one of those things, and that's all about apport phenomena. It's really, really interesting, and it deals with like everyday cases of those things.
Yeah.
But where I wanted to go with this is that because poltergeist phenomena is so vast, my suggestion is get rid of that umbrella term.
I agree.
Because I do not understand why we would use such a huge, far-reaching term for what may well be unrelated phenomena. They've listed all of those different things. If you see an apparition, is it poltergeist phenomena? Some would argue no, because I only saw an apparition. Well, you know, you did hear some bumps and bangs as well. Yeah, but that's just things that go bump in the night. That's a poltergeist. Yes, but apparitions also fall under the term poltergeist. They come under that umbrella term because it's some of the things that have been witnessed have been visual phenomena as well as audible. And things being thrown or moved. An apport comes under the heading of poltergeist. As I mentioned earlier, spontaneous fire breaking out and water deposits. Well, there's also a phenomenon known as spontaneous human combustion, which is where a human bursts into flames out of nowhere and dies. More often than not, they burst into flames and they're dead. Now, if spontaneous fire is poltergeist, could that person who's apparently spontaneously combusted just have found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time and been struck by a spontaneous fire brought about by a, inverted commas, poltergeist? If that's the case, then does spontaneous human combustion also come under the term poltergeist? If we're starting to add everything that is occurring under the umbrella term of poltergeist, then poltergeist covers everything.
It does.
Now, the interesting thing about poltergeist as a term, as a word, in the German language, noisy spirit, also has a deep-seated origin in ancient Germanic folklore as a pixie, a troll-like being, a goblin, even a demon. I don't like to say that word, but even comes under that terminology. Poltergeist, used centuries ago, was a term used for ethereal beings like fairies and pixies and trolls, for example. So, if we say that, let's say for the sake of argument, that poltergeist in its original form 1,000 years ago meant demon, okay? Right, let's just say that, okay?
I'm with you, James.
Then it's arguable that every single piece of paranormal phenomena that occurs can fall under the poltergeist heading, because I've already listed all the things, that it covers all of those things. Therefore, everything that's paranormal at the moment can be deemed to be demonic, right? And that's exactly where we are now in modern media and its approach to paranormal phenomena. Now, without the religious connotation, if you strip that away and we say demons don't exist, because we fundamentally, you and I, Adie, we fundamentally conclude that demons don't exist. But yet we believe, based on evidence and research, that certain phenomena under that heading does exist. So there's an argument there to separate that and like I said, consign the term poltergeist in the same way that EVP would be to the history books, because it is too generic a term to actually be useful to help with the nomenclature of paranormal phenomena. Why categorise everything as poltergeist? There's no point.
I think we actually spoke about this in another Sanctum, I'm sure we did.
Very briefly, I think, yeah.
We did, where we were speaking that we need to strip everything back and basically start again.
You just need to look at each individual type of phenomena and research that, define that, rather than saying apports are poltergeists. Well, if an apport happens but all the other things don't happen, why is that a poltergeist? Well, because an object appeared and reappeared. But could that be? Could there be an element of quantum mechanics going on? Could there be a trans-dimensional element to it? Does it have to be entity driven? Could it just be at a subatomic level? There's not even an entity involved. You see, these are the questions that need to be asked about that, and that's why I think that the term poltergeist just needs to be removed, because it's too big an umbrella, like the term ghost.
I agree. I completely agree. You said this before we went on the air. You were talking about that very thing.
Yeah.
And I have sat here thinking about it while you've been talking tonight, and I was sitting there thinking, you're pretty much bang on the money. I think, from what I can see, certainly with the books I've been reading of late, is that it appears to be I'll simplify it like an ingredient for something you're making, for that to become poltergeist phenomenon. At least I always thought of it that way.
Yeah.
It was always meant to be bangs first, normally the bangs that start first, people are going, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Possible apparitions, things then being moved.
Yeah.
Normally quite violently.
Yeah. Or even things heard to be moved, but like crashing crockery and furniture being thrown
dragging is
around.
the first one that pops into my head.
And then you go into the room and nothing's been moved. So you hear all of this chaos, but actually nothing's actually
an audible phenomena that may have happened.
Like a sort of an alternate dimension, like the room in another dimension has been trashed and you can hear it, but you can't see it. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's, I agree with you, I think everything's getting thrown under the umbrella.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to be not just stripped back. I think we need to be focusing on elements of what's going on.
Yeah.
I happen to think, and I think I had this conversation with you. It might have been you actually gave me the idea, to be fair, because you often do that. You'll say something that sets my brain off.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I remember you said before. Yeah.
We were talking about poltergeist activity actually, and I was suggesting that, well, if we can recreate this man-made, which we can in laboratory situations, then what if it's just an environmental cocktail that's happened?
Yeah.
But because of, I'm going to say a lot of it, if it wasn't for the apparitions and the so-called voices, I don't think people would be thinking the way they are.
No.
If I'm honest. That I personally think that's a separate thing that's going on to what is actually happening when things are being moved.
Mm-hmm.
I do happen to think there's probably we like a magnet effect, where I think two things, like an opposing magnet, if you put them one way, they repel each other.
Yeah.
And I happen to think that naturally this can occur. We haven't studied it enough or come across it enough to be able to say, yep, this is what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this happens in certain locations. It's probably happening in the middle of a field and you just won't notice.
Absolutely.
Okay? And I think what's happening is these forces are coming together and it's exploding backwards because it's hit itself
repelling.
And it's repelled it, and all of a sudden my e-cigarette goes flying across the room and you go, what the hell was that? Oh my God, I've got this going on.
Yeah.
That's where my thoughts are going.
I agree. I mean, if you go and stand on a beach in the middle of the night and you look up at the sky and you can see the moon and you can hear the waves and you can see them crashing on the beach, the moon's doing that.
Of course it is. It's created by the great big...
The moon's gravitational force pulls the waves across the surface of the Earth.
Yes.
Now, that is a huge external force, but it's unseen. All we see is the result of it.
Yes.
We see the moon and we see the waves, but we don't see the drag across the surface of the planet.
The tides, basically.
Exactly, the tides.
They do see it when the tide goes out because of the position of where things are.
Yeah.
I think that's common knowledge, I would have thought to most people.
It is common knowledge because of scientific research. But
Yes.
what I'm saying is that we don't see that. We experience it because we witness the tides.
Yeah.
And we see the moon. But if that hadn't been researched, we wouldn't know the correlation between moon and tides. So what I'm saying is that there may be, as you said, a lot of environmental cocktails that are going on, that are unseen, that have this physical effect, but we just don't see what is happening. So it could be happening at a subatomic level where something's being dragged, and maybe, you know, we talk about, and we're getting really, really deep into the makeup of the universe, for example. If we're going to look at it at that big, if you look at dark matter, or you look at what actually makes up the universe, and the way things pull and stretch and work on each other, gravity, all of the rest of it, there could be a lot of these things that are happening where a physical object is being pulled somehow through space-time and appears elsewhere. So it's being pulled at a subatomic level and then being rebuilt elsewhere. So it could be that something outside of our planet is actually moving Granny's teacup,
yes,
for example, and it's just been pulled across space-time and it's moved 6 feet. But we don't see what's going on. We just see that Granny's teacup's moved or flown across the room. But actually, there may be something that's going on at on a universal scale that we can't see. But it's affecting the atoms, the actual particles that make that object up. It's just caused them to move because for some reason their arrangement happened to be affected by whatever physical force was going on, but unseen. So it's a bizarre thing to think all these things are going on. We talked about before, we're spinning through space.
Yes.
But we're sat here at a table. Do you feel like we're spinning through space at such a rate? You know, past around the sun, with the moon spinning around us. We don't see any of that, but it's happening right now. And that's a really bizarre thought. So if we take that as a macro scale, and then we take Earth as the micro scale, the smaller scale, there will be lots of other things that are happening on this planet that we can't see, that are happening all around us, but we just can't see it, and it is affecting these things. But we go, it's a ghost, that's paranormal, that's poltergeist, that's EVP, but actually it may be none of that.
Agreed. I think because the phenomena is actually really quite rare, it's very difficult to actually research it enough to be able to say this is what we have found.
Yeah.
I think the closest they probably got was Enfield in the last 40 odd years.
Yeah.
I think that was the closest they probably got to studying poltergeist phenomena in a way where they literally, it lasted 2 years supposedly.
Yeah.
So they could literally bring everything in to as much as they possibly could to research what was going on.
Yeah.
But I just don't think we were there yet with maybe what we were trying to look for, because we were too interested in the voice of Bill, and which whether the voice was real or not, I'm tending to lean towards a different way with that now. I used to think that it was possibly the voice of a person.
Right. Well, it probably is the voice of a person.
But not and you know where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah.
And not the person everyone thought it was at the time. I happen to think it was Janet.
Yes.
And I think the fact
and
that
a sister as well.
and a
they
sister,
both had the voice
and not only that, not the fact that it was also her brother who was also beginning to mimic the voice, which I found really, really quite fascinating. And I think that deviated the research they could have been doing thanks to that particular phenomena happening.
Yeah.
Which wasn't really phenomenal. I still believe it was the children messing around.
I think so.
And I also happen to think that I think things did happen, but I think they embellished on it as soon as they got the attention. And then when the attention started to back off a little bit, they started stepping up their game, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then the voice of Bill started happening, and then it was, they're paying attention to us now.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
You know, I just think it's an embellished phenomena.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is, I say this a lot, but I think a lot of it is misinterpreted. What's going on at the time. I think we all, I think if I was in that situation, I would probably get caught up a little bit too. And I don't think there's many investigators out there that would say they wouldn't, because you'd be so excited about what's going on.
I agree.
I think to look at it rationally at the time, it must have been quite difficult.
Yeah.
I do think they explained quite a lot of it away, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And I think they managed to, but there's still parts of, or elements of what was going on that even the investigators that showed up couldn't get.
No, I agree. A lot of that tended to be the physical side of things, like the apports and the moving objects and things. The chair that was witnessed by a police officer, little Lego bricks flying through the air, those sorts of things they couldn't find a source to. So to me, those little things are probably the more likely things that actually happened. The other things were probably more likely to be what you were saying. But I want to touch on, the phenomena that we're talking about, because it's often the phrase at the moment that is being bandied around a lot, and I've used it a lot myself, is spontaneous phenomena. Okay? Now, spontaneous means it's something that happens...
Regularity.
Yeah, it just happens. There's no rhyme or reason to it. But ghosts fall under the term spontaneous phenomena. Okay?
Yeah.
My argument for that is, and this is a challenge to the likes of Steve Parsons actually, that how do we classify recurring apparitions if we're classing them as spontaneous? So, for example, Peter Underwood spoke at length about, for example, the Grey Lady is seen every July the 24th in the grounds, walking the garden, for example, of a castle. This happens every July the 24th and has done since 1843, blah, blah, blah. That's not spontaneous.
No, because it's a recurring event.
Exactly. So it's predictable. So spontaneous means usually that it's unpredictable. So recurring phenomena, that it recurs on a frequency, on a cycle, should not fall under the category of spontaneous phenomena. It should be classed as cyclical phenomena, I think. Everything in the universe pretty much works on a cycle. The seasons last a certain length of time because of the way that our planet rotates, the closeness to the sun, gravitational pull of things. They're all regular. They're all pretty regular, and they're all thoroughly predictable, which is why people like the Maya were able to create their calendar and know exactly the position of stars at any given point. And we can do that now with precession and tracing the stars across the sky, etc. So, if we know that the universe works to this regular cyclical process, could that not also be used to explain recurring phenomena? So we could argue that recurring phenomena may be directly linked to the cycles of our planet.
I like that.
So when we talk about a ghost that appears at a particular point in time, maybe partially or in full-bodied, maybe 200 years ago we always used to see the Grey Lady in full form, but now we only see a little bit of her because over time, for whatever reason, it wears away. Could that be something to do with what may be changing externally to this planet? So we're moving away, our universe is expanding. The theory is that our universe is expanding, it's being stretched, energy is being pushed into our universe, dark energy as it's called. We don't know what it is, but it's being pushed into our universe, and it's expanding. So distances between things are changing. So could it be that even though we have this cyclical approach to gravity, Earth rotation, and our solar cycle...
Yeah, but we're also moving along with it.
Exactly.
Yes.
So if we're moving along with it, relationships between stars and planets may be being stretched and changed slightly. So maybe certain forces are being changed. So could that explain the degradation of this cyclical phenomena? So you always see it, but you see it differently each time because the dark energy that's going into the universe is affecting the way that the cosmos, everything is working. So rather than look at spontaneous and what I would argue to be cyclical phenomena on this micro level, should we potentially look at everything rather than just Earth?
I like that.
We share a relationship with every single thing in all of, I'm going to use a term that I don't really like, but in all of creation, right? In the entire universe, we share a relationship. So why are we looking at it to be spontaneous phenomena in this castle, in this country, on this little dot? Carl Sagan, as Voyager left our galaxy, it turned back and took a photograph.
That's right.
And I think it was in a beam of light, and it was a speck of blue dust in the beam of light. And Carl Sagan wrote this big long thing about, look at this little speck of dust in the middle of a sunbeam, I think he was calling it. And he said about all the dictators, all the wars, all the killing that's happened to secure one part of one speck of dust. And it was like, look how insignificant we are. And I think that we spend so much time looking about, this is happening on Earth. Earth is a speck of dust in a sunbeam in the entire universe. And yet we think that all of this spontaneous and cyclical phenomena is just happening on this planet. Well, it may not be. It may be being affected by, it may be
on a
affected,
universal scale.
Exactly. It may be us as a little speck of blue dust. 1 pixel is being affected by everything that's going on. So why are we only looking at this micro scale rather than thinking what's actually going on in the rest of the universe that may be causing these things to happen?
There's a saying that people say that when we have a full moon, that the crazy people are going to come out tonight because they're affected by the moon.
That's where the word lunatic comes
from.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that adds a little bit of credence to the theory that you're even if it's off the cuff, it's something that you're thinking about. I kind of agree with you. I don't think I've thought about it enough to think on a universal scale. That there are theories of that if we line up the planets, it would have a catastrophic effect on Earth.
Yeah, like conjunctions with planets that bring about different gravitational forces.
Exactly. There are theories of that. I'm not sure that's exactly true, to be fair, because we're about to have crossed paths many times over the last 4 billion years.
I think a lot of it comes from the mythological characters behind the stars. So it's like when Mars is in
alignment,
is in Aquarius, this happens, and Scorpio's in alignment. So it's all linked to astrology, really, about what the stars represent to us on this planet. Because of course, when we look at the sky and we see the Plough, or for our American listeners, the Big Dipper, and we see Orion's belt, and we see the triple stars lined up, and we see the whole thing. You leave the Earth, and then you look at those stars. They're not in constellations. They're not arranged in that way, because we're only seeing them at constellations because of the unique angle at which we view them from. If you viewed them from the side, they would just look like a single dot, or not at all.
We've also talked about this in a previous podcast on the perception of how you see.
Exactly.
I can see where your brain's going of late. I like that.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I can tell.
Linked to dark energy and dark matter and the way that our universe is being affected. Yeah,
I do wish you had mentioned this before, and I could have had a look. And I could have looked into it instead of looking at you like a dog going,
right.
I like that theory.
I just think that, I think my message really is that all of these things are linked.
Yeah.
I think it's
joining the dots, so to speak.
I think it's very dangerous to just say that, this set of phenomena comes under this umbrella term, but actually, really, when you think about it, everything comes under the poltergeist term because it is so vast. And I was talking about, when we're talking about environmental factors, the way that our Earth is being affected, but ultimately, what are the forces that are at work that are affecting our Earth? Our apparitions, our apports, our bumps and bangs, electronic voice phenomena, physical assaults, you name it, that comes under this big umbrella term, are all of those things ultimately being caused by what's going on outside of this planet and ultimately across the entire universe. We talk about environmental, okay, but environmental is scalable. So we talk about our environment. At the moment, you and I are sat in this room, and this is our environment. Outside of this room is the house. Outside of the house is the street. Outside of the street is the road. Then there's the motorway. Then there's the fields. Then there's the city, the town. There's the whole thing. Ultimately, it's the country. Then it's the continent. Then it's the planet. All of it is our environment. We occupy one tiny speck of dust in a sunbeam, which is the entire environment. As Carl Sagan explained it. So my message is: let's not limit ourselves to a heading for something. Let's look at what's going on under all of these things. And at the moment, we're only looking about it in terms of how it happens on Earth. but we're none the wiser. Why aren't we cross-referencing cyclical phenomena with planetary activity, with universal activity?
I think...
we're trying to measure dark matter. So we're trying to measure how much dark matter is being placed, is occupying the space. If we can measure that, if we can see how that changes, how does that affect the planet, and does it line up with the data that we've got on phenomena?
We do know that some, certainly researchers do take note of where the moon is when certain things are happening.
Yeah, the phases of the moon.
The phases of the moon, which ultimately most of the time doesn't have anything to do with anything.
No.
So
or at least we don't have enough data in order to be able to cross-reference it.
I like your magnetic theory of what you're talking about, though, because that would make a little bit of sense, at least to me.
And if the universe is literally being stretched because of dark energy, right? If we see the universe as being, I don't know, potentially multi-dimensional, and it's being stretched and pulled, and all of this, everything around us, even if you picked up this can and said, well, that's aluminium, that's man-made. Okay, well, it's a byproduct. It's been made by, I think, bauxite or something else that it's merged with. They're elements that are found on this planet that are ultimately found prevalent elsewhere in the universe. Nothing that you see, even if it's man-made, has been created out of nowhere. Everything has its root in base elements. So what I'm getting at is that everything's the same. So if it's all being pulled and stretched, it's still made of the same stuff. In principle, parts of this are still the base material. So if only bauxite, for example, is being affected by the pulling and stretching of the universe, maybe tin cans will start to move. I don't know, but it's that's one little example. But if you're saying, if I'm saying that groups of atoms and particles are being stretched and pulled and affected, could that not then explain how certain things are being moved or destroyed or thrown? Because there's unseen forces that are moving them. They're not being thrown by an unseen entity. They're being moved by the forces of the universe. For example, that's just a theory.
Yeah, I happen to think it's a localized version of what you were just saying. I have an interest in magnetism and things like that, and I often quote EMF and stuff like that, which I happen to think has a lot to do with stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think there was something you were saying earlier on that if things are done cyclical in a certain way, that's why it's seen at this point. Well, could it be down to the magnetics at the time, which is at a heightened state because of the location? That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
so where things are,
and therefore that makes it predictable, because if it is gravitational, then the gravity is always going to be the same at any given point. Or maybe it's atmospheric, in which case it's maybe less predictable. But if you look at meteorological data, you may be able to predict when it's more likely to occur. So if you start building up a pattern for these things, then we can go back to what we're talking about with you, with the environmental cocktail, to say, well, the moon's in the right phase, the right gravitational pull's being exerted on the planet. The atmospherics are the same as they were when it was last observed. Humidity's the same, temperature's the same, wind direction. Right, so therefore, at this point, it may be more likely that we'll see the Grey Lady on the 24th of July this year, not next year, because everything's going to be
in the right position.
The isobars, everything's all in the right way. Bang, then we record something, or we don't. But I think if we start looking at things on a global and then a much larger level, I think we could be onto something.
I think you might be right, Neil, mate. The more I sit and think about it, the more my brain is actually thinking on that. As I'm actually just sitting there thinking about it now, and actually thinking, well, I've had a few theories over the time that kind of relates a little bit to what you're talking about. I like that idea, and the more you think about it, the more it makes more sense to me.
We know things are changing, don't we? Like I said, that we know the universe is expanding because they're at the moment, or they have been, measuring the time it takes from a supernova
for the light to travel.
And they've measured it, and they're getting further away. So actually the universe is expanding, and it's actually speeding up.
Yeah, and it would do, because there's nothing to friction to stop it. So theoretically, it should get faster and faster. But
it's supposed. But the thing is that the previous model worked on a rule that the universe was expanding at a set rate. but it's not. It's actually getting faster, and we don't know why. But these are the questions that we have about the universe, which is it's behaving unpredictably, right? Well, if the universe is supposed to be expanding at a standard rate, but now we find that it isn't, it's either our measurements are wrong, or it's correct and it's getting faster, and it's not our measurements.
No, the thing is, I would think it would get faster though, because you need something in the way for it to slow down.
But the question is, what's causing it to speed up? Why is it expanding at a faster rate? And the answer to that is that the dark energy, this is what they're calling it, is being pumped into our universe and forcing that expansion. But dark matter is not changing in its density. So they don't know why the dark matter, which is the space that's in between our planets and stars, remains the same in terms of volume, yet more energy is being placed into it. They're expecting that dark matter would increase as energy increases, but they believe that the work at CERN, with the particle accelerator, where they found particles appearing and disappearing and reappearing, that's a good argument for quantum, because they're saying that dark matter is not increasing even though energy is being forced in. Particles are disappearing and reappearing, so it's kind of maintaining that equilibrium. So if that's happening, that's a good argument for multidimensional theories that have come forward. But it also may explain why, if energy is being pumped into our universe, where's it coming from, and what force is being exerted on everything that's already in there, and that could explain some of our spontaneous phenomena. This hitherto undiscovered energy that we all talk about on this planet may actually be dark energy, which is an energy that we don't know.
Actually on the planet?
No, dark energy being pumped into our universe.
Which is affecting everything around.
Yeah, which is causing the acceleration of the universe's expansion. We don't know where it's coming from or what it is, but we know that it exists. But that could explain the in quotes energy that we all talk about that spirits are using, are spontaneous, cyclical, and spontaneous and cyclical phenomena being powered by dark energy.
I find it interesting that we know more about something that's going on in deep space than we do with something that may be happening on the planet.
Yeah.
Don't you find that interesting?
Yeah. It's because they bothered to look, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Mainstream science hasn't looked at what you and I and the rest of the researchers are looking at, not to a great extent, not to that extent. People like Einstein, now let's talk about some key figures, right? Einstein, genius. Tesla, now he knew what he was talking about. Tesla was talking about, if we look at non-physical phenomena, right, non-physical things, he meant energy. The guy was probably talking about dark energy. That's probably what he meant. Now if dark energy is an energy source, then it's massive. If it's all around us, which they believe it is, like dark matter, it actually permeates everything that we are, we could harness that as a power source. It's energy. We just don't know how to harness it. So if it's always been there, could it be that entities, or whatever it is that we want to call them, are using dark energy? And that's the reason why we can't find it, because we don't know what it is.
I have never even considered what you just said.
Could be.
And I feel a little bit stupid listening to it and thinking I haven't considered that.
But don't you think?
Yeah, I do now.
Everybody goes, oh, it's an energy source. What is it? We don't know. Well, there's one energy source that we know exists that we don't know what it is, and it's dark energy. What are they made of? We don't know. There's matter. We don't know what it is. It's called dark matter. We don't know what it's made of. Could they be made of dark matter? We don't know. But these are mainstream scientific things that people are working on now. So why can't we try and grasp the research?
Apply it.
Grasp the research.
And not only that, apply it to the things that we're trying to do.
Yeah.
I think you may be thinking about things that people are not. Because, I'll be honest, that's the first I've heard about it, what you just said.
I think we just need to be looking at it, because I think Tesla, like I said, Tesla was onto this. He was on it. This guy was
way ahead of his time.
This guy was, they call him the father of the 20th century, I think they call him, don't they, Tesla, because of the electricity and the fact that he just gave birth to this the alternating current and all the rest of it. Fantastic. And he already said about researching non-physical energy.
Yeah, the great quote that everybody should know.
Yeah, we've quoted it loads of times. And it's like, that's probably what he meant. This guy wasn't an idiot. He probably was ahead of Einstein when he was thinking about this. But Einstein wasn't able to create electricity, was he? Generate it.
Yeah, there were also stories that he stole a few patents, I believe, wasn't it?
Who?
Who was
Edison did.
That's it, Edison.
Edison did. Yeah. Oh yeah. Edison was a proper businessman. So he would do what a lot of large companies do now, which is, you've patented something. I'm going to buy that patent, because when I create something, I'm going to use your technology. And if I'm going to use your technology, you can sue me, so I'm going to get that patent.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get it whichever way I want, because you used some underhand tactics. And he mistreated Tesla as well. He diddled him out of money.
I've read about that.
Just didn't pay him, I don't think. But Tesla was such an easygoing guy that he never chased him for it. I think he was owed millions probably in today's money.
Wow.
But I think people like Einstein and Tesla were onto these things. But I think what they're doing now is they're researching it on a mainstream scientific, let's explain the universe, let's see how big it is, where it's going, what we're made of, what things are, how we can quantify things. Let's explore string theory and quantum mechanics, rather than, okay, let's explain some of this weird phenomena that's happening, because no one's been able to explain this for 1,000 years or so, or for longer. It's been happening. Is it linked? Because no one's been able to explain it yet. So let's use that unknown and pick that unknown, and let's see if they've got a link. I don't know, but that's my thought anyway. But I think Tesla was onto it when he said about energy.
I think you've blown me out of the water, to be fair. You've given me a lot to think about.
It's freaky, isn't it, when you think about it?
Yes. And
it's all around us.
And I don't think I'm going to get much sleep tonight now, because my brain is beginning to go. It's catching up with what you're saying. Because I'm looking at him wide-eyed, ladies and gentlemen, thinking, where did this come from? Is what I'm thinking, because it's the first I've heard James mention this.
It's just something I've been thinking about probably for the past few weeks, I guess.
Oh, that's why I haven't heard it then.
Something like that, yeah.
This is why I hate why you're not on Twitter, because you would normally have said something to me about it.
Well, it's good to share it on here, isn't
absolutely. It? And I'm hoping there's a load of researchers out there now that their eyes are also as wide as I am as you're listening back on this.
I hope so, because that's more far-reaching than just ghost and paranormal researchers. That's actually into the mainstream science.
As weird as it sounds, it's almost like you're saying it's a byproduct of the events that's going on around.
Yeah, I think it is. I think, well, everything is, isn't it?
Well, we've been discussing byproducts for some time. I think some of these are byproducts of the events.
Put it this way. Let's say there's a big earthquake happens in Australia, right? We can't feel it here, but for some reason the shock waves go through the planet. And we're sat in here, and then all of a sudden that picture on the opposite wall shakes and falls off. It appears to sort of bounce off the nail. And we look at it and we think, how the hell has that managed to bounce off the nail? That's bizarre. Actually, then later on we read there was an earthquake. But we never felt it. We just saw the outcome at a very, very small level, because maybe one shockwave, tiny one, just managed to go up through the planet and hit my wall where my painting is, and it bounced off. But even knowing that there was an earthquake in Australia may still not make us put two and two together and think that's what caused that painting to jump off.
Actually, I would doubt any person would put that together and say that's what caused.
But it might.
It might.
So we look at all these things that are going on. So why is it unusual then to hypothesise that it's not an earthquake that caused it? Why couldn't it be something else? Why couldn't it be the result of an exploding star billions of miles away?
And we're just feeling the effects.
And all of a sudden the effect is just felt in one tiny little bit of the galaxy, and the one tiny little bit of the solar system that we occupy, that specific square 4 feet or whatever it is in that area got hit by it. Nothing else did anywhere else in the universe, just that little bit. It just caused it to just go back. But something billions of light years away may have happened before planet Earth was even formed, just reached us and caused it. Why do we only think that it's on this little planet? We always think that we're important, but actually the bigger thing is what we should be looking at.
To be fair, we still consider that we are the middle of the universe, let's face it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy. I find it still strange that there are people out there that still feel that we're the only ones in this vast.
Yeah, we can't be. We can't.
You know that's a ludicrous statement.
Yeah.
And also very. What's the word? It's very arrogant.
It is. Yeah.
Extremely arrogant to think that there's no such thing as this. What makes you think that? Do you actually look up at night?
Yeah.
You know, look out there. Does that look like we're alone to you?
And to think that maybe we're the pinnacle.
Yeah.
In terms of the evolution of any living thing in the entire universe. To some other life forms potentially elsewhere in this universe, we may be little more than the little silverfish that you see.
Agreed.
You know, near a puddle, or the plankton that whales eat. We
talked about Area 51 at the start of this podcast, where we were talking about people storming. And the more I listen to somebody like Bob Lazar, the more I'm beginning to believe what he's saying, because the little things are trickling out over the years that's making me go, I don't think this guy was lying.
Yeah.
I think this guy really was where he said he was, and this has happened.
Yeah.
And it's just taken 30 years before people are catching up to what he's saying. You know, he was talking about gravity drives and element 115, or whatever it was. I can't remember the number.
Right.
115, wasn't it? Was it 115? I'm sorry, viewers, I can't remember the actual number. But what he's saying is it was a stable element that we tried to recreate, but it wouldn't stay.
Okay.
It wouldn't stay stable.
Okay.
It didn't break down. But the more he talks about, well, actually, this craft that I worked on, the thing I like about it is he was explaining how the craft moves. And what he was saying is everyone expects it to take off like this cannon picking up, and it goes off like this. But what he was actually saying is it doesn't work like that. What it actually does is it lifts, turns the belly to the direction that it wants to go, and travels in that direction.
It's pulled by something then.
Sort of like he called it the gravity drive, that it sits down and these things move so it can point it. But it's really interesting to think of it like that. Nobody really come up with that idea unless he was working on something.
Yeah. He's either got a great imagination, or it's true, or it's made up completely. It's a lie just for media attention. But in 30 years' time, after he's said it and somebody says here it is, then you know that he wasn't lying.
The thing is, I'm still expecting it to happen. I'm still a big believer that a lot of the craft that we see are man-made, super secret devices.
Yeah.
Why don't you look at it this way? The SR-71 Blackbird, the only reason we know about that plane is because an accident happened and it was spotted.
Right.
You know, that's the only reason you know about it.
Yeah.
That technology, before we found out about it, was about 20, 30 years old. Now, if aviation is moving that fast, that means that the planes that they are now releasing to us now are most likely 20 to 30 years old.
Yeah.
So where are they at this point?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
There were a lot of sightings of... We got away from Poltergeists, but it's interesting to talk away. It's interesting to move into the UFO phenomenon.
It is, yeah.
And I think we should do a show on that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
The interesting thing is that people are seeing triangular craft. I myself, as a 7-year-old lad, saw a triangular craft no more than 100 feet above houses, completely silent, moved overhead. It had 3 circular lights in each corner and a red pulsating light in the middle. Move off, and there was no sound. Now, people see these triangular crafts, and roughly 10-15 years later, we are now told there's a stealth craft that happens to be triangular.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
We now have helicopters, which they're still not saying is real, that can throw their sound to sound like it's coming off in a different direction to where the helicopter's actually coming.
Right.
If we can create stuff like that, does it make sense to think that it's alien, or is it just that we're far more advanced than what we're giving ourselves credit for?
Yeah.
I personally think that I happen to think that the UFO phenomenon is a great way of protecting your secrets by saying, we saw a UFO. Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah.
It's a great cover story.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's perfect, isn't it?
Yeah, let the people believe what they want to believe.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, because while they're talking about little green men flying these things, they're not actually thinking about what the military or potentially other sort of covert applications are for those craft.
Agreed. I suppose we should get back on the subject, though.
We've actually talked about this subject a lot, haven't we?
We have.
So it's good, but I think it all kind of ties in with the same thing, which is, you know, they all come under the umbrella of unexplained, and it's really dangerous to talk about something as being poltergeist or even, you know, UFO or alien.
Yes.
When actually we don't know that it's alien. We don't know that it's not human made. Oh, actually, we don't know that it's, you know, something else that's going on.
Agreed.
There's so much stuff that's unexplained. It's so limiting to categorise things when we don't even know what we're categorising.
I think the interesting thing that you said earlier on, that the stuff that's going on with the poltergeist phenomenon could literally be separate incidences just happening at once.
Yeah.
But because it happens in that location, or what people are telling you has happened, that we've connected dots that may not actually be connected.
Exactly.
That's interesting to me. I've already spoken about I think things move because there's a natural thing going on. It's probably wrong, but it's an interesting theory that
it's just as good as anybody else's.
That these effects are repelling each other, which moves things, and it just so happens that a child happens to live in the place.
Yeah.
And because of the stories, we were talking about it earlier on, actually, before we came to hear about Alan Gould talking about things that are happening in the 1500s, even going back.
Yeah.
To the times where I can't remember the story I was reading recently because I've only read the book once and I tend to do it twice and then it sticks in my head. But you know, he was talking about, I can't remember the guy's name. I think it was in Sweden, or I think it's Sweden. I'm sure I'm going to get jumped on for getting that wrong.
Well, that book covers cases from all over the world,
exactly.
Really. So
it does. But it's although he's compiled them into his book, about 200 cases, I think he says he's put in the book.
Exactly.
It's still very rare if you consider the amount of time that he's actually talking about. If he's talking about in the last 400-500 years, 200 cases is not really a lot that we're aware of.
Well, that's only 200
that
cases
he's put into
that
the
he's
book.
Selected.
That he's selected in his book.
Yeah, there's plenty of others.
Perhaps maybe they're the ones that he actually considers more interesting than others.
I think so. And also ones that, you know, to be fair, you know, let's not say that it's a perfect book. You know, I think sometimes the cases are, I think, maybe have been selected to support his theories that he's already got. So it doesn't kind of go, this is every single case, this is my conclusion. It's like, I have a conclusion and these are the cases that kind of support that. I think that's probably fair to say with that book.
I think so too.
Still a good book though.
Yes,
but it is
really
limiting, I think, in the sense that all the cases he's picked kind of support his hypothesis.
Agreed. I think a lot of the things that we're reading, especially with poltergeist activity, a lot of it's down to just interpretation of what's going on. I happen to think that people are making... I kind of think of it as a stew. I keep saying ingredients. It's kind of like a stew that because of X, Y, and Z happens, then it must be this. And I don't think it is.
No.
I'm not in that bracket of believing that's what's happening. I would prefer it. I mean, we haven't had a good poltergeist case in about 40 years, that to my knowledge.
Yeah.
Of what's going on. That's subjective in itself, and it's also quite telling. I think with the advent of better technologies coming around, perhaps it's not quite so easy now for someone to say this is happening in my home. I don't know. I think
you're right. I think there's probably a lot of things that previously may have been held up to be poltergeist actually turn out to be natural and now easy to prove.
Yeah, I think so too. Natural. And I don't think. I still happen to think that's something we said recently. I happen to think it happens probably all the time. It's just that it's not something we notice.
I think so.
And I think it's probably natural what's going on.
You could argue as well that it's cultural.
Yeah.
And that it's to do, and also societal, in the sense that it's not that it isn't happening, it's just that we're not seeing it in the way that societally we used to. So somebody 500 years ago, anything potentially would be paranormal, whereas now there's so much stuff that we can explain that it's all been explained. But also I think as well, the zeitgeist, as we talked about, the current state of affairs in the field, and also wider in society as a whole, the way that people regard things is that it's going very much down towards a specific route. And if it's not that, then it's not paranormal. And I think that people are discounting a lot. So maybe people are not reporting things. So maybe it is happening, but they're afraid to report it because of maybe the media attention they'll get.
Yeah. I happen to think also a lot of it's down to this. I'm holding my phone in my hand. People don't look up from it anymore.
No. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's potentially missed, isn't there?
Do you know what I mean? I know my girlfriend tells me off for it about a lot. I'm constantly picking up my phone.
Yeah.
Which has become the norm, I think, for most households these
I'm the
days.
same. Yeah.
You know, I am trying my best to put it down. I don't want to upset my girlfriend because I love her and I want to keep her. I think a lot of it's down to that. As technology is progressing, we're looking away from those type of things now that are happening.
Becoming less observant and relying more on technology to look for us, like with CCTV.
So. Yeah, we're now putting cameras in our homes.
Yes.
You know, I watched something on on Instagram the other day where somebody's beginning to put their footage up of what's lights switching on. Unfortunately, I can't. This person, nobody can move this camera because but I can't see underneath the camera, so I can't say that you're not moving it. You just can't see it.
Yeah.
You know, it's that kind of thing. A light switching on. Yeah, okay, but the light switch is not in view. You could be just standing to the side.
And even if the light switch was in view, how do you know that it's the actual light switch?
Exactly. You know, and then it's like, lots of paranormal stuff. And I can see a list of people going, it's amazing what you're capturing.
No, it's difficult to make any conclusions from something where you haven't got any of that information.
Agreed. I think what really needs to happen is a good, proper, considered a proper case needs to come along now where the advancements of where we are, perhaps I'm not saying Morris and Guy didn't, because I think they did what they could with what they had at the time.
Men of their time, weren't they?
Yes, exactly. But with the things that we've got now, I'd really be interested to see what we could actually capture with that kind of phenomenon taking place, if indeed it does happen.
I think the media jumps on things so quickly.
It destroys any... in my opinion, it does. It destroys. And besides, if anything did kick off, we know bloody Zach Bagans would show up.
Yeah, well, the circus comes to town, doesn't it? And then it's ruined. So anything that may have actually happened becomes blown out of all proportion, over publicised, and then the skeptics roll in and say this is a circus and it's all made up and it's fake, and on we go. So I think that's really difficult.
I mentioned a rubberist earlier on. It kind of to be the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Just going round in a circle, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So we've talked about poltergeists and EVP, and we've talked about some of the things that have happened in the news, and we've answered a few of our listeners' questions as well. So
I have to say, I really enjoyed that.
Yes. I know it's great to get that engagement, because that will drive us to have those wider discussions.
Oh, absolutely. And if anybody out there disagrees with what we said, please tell us.
Definitely. If you've got alternative theories or a different view, or you want to correct anything that we may have said that you think or is incorrect. But there are no facts in this. So I challenge anybody to tell us that we're wrong. The only thing I would be expecting to be told that I'm wrong about, or we've been wrong about, are where we've been talking about any specific scientific proven facts.
Agreed.
If we're talking about something that's unquantifiable, then I challenge anybody to give me a fact about something that's not been defined yet.
Yes, which happens to us online when we go and speak to people.
Exactly. So I think we shall wind this one up. So thank you, and I hope that you've really enjoyed listening to this new episode of the Inner Sanctum.
And I want to say, James, your theories tonight have been absolutely fantastic.
Cheers.
The brilliance of why I love your brain so much when you start talking.
Thanks, mate.
I often say that James sets my brain off, and he does. He sets my brain going, which is what I'm hoping translates to the people out there that listen to this podcast.
I hope so.
That
inspired some thought.
Inspiring thought. I happen to think that's what the podcast is. We want to inspire thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to get people to think.
And if he's getting me to think, and I'm an overthinker, You know, but I haven't even thought about what he talked about tonight, and now I'm going to go away thinking about it and start, when I listen back on the podcast.
Start chewing it over.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So next time we probably talk on the podcast, we're probably going to be talking about it again, because we're going to be like, right, I sat and thought about what you were talking about, James, and this is what I came up with.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Goodbye from me. Join us next time.
Goodbye.
The Inner Sanctum Paranormal Podcast.